So we can start the legislative committee and call roll, please.
Okay. Cliff Manuel.
Present.
Commissioner Long. I think she has another engagement this morning, so she will not be joining us. Jim Holton.
I do see him there, but I don't.
Here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Commissioner Mitten.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Commissioner Starkey. And then Rich McLean.
I'm here, present.
Okay, so you do have a quorum.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, board. How are y'all this morning? So I'll call the meeting to order and open with public comment. Did we have any public comment this morning, Jennifer?
Not from my end. I know that Cindy Raskin is handling that for us as well on the line. Cindy, do you have any comments?
Morning. We do not have any calls on the public comment telephone line at this time.
Thank you. So I'll move into consent agenda items. We only have one, which is our meeting minutes from February and April of 2020.
Move for approval, John Mitten.
Second, Rich McLean.
Okay.
I have a motion and a second to accept them for our records. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Oh, we do have to take
Or
roll.
a roll
So
call, I guess.
we do have to take roll for
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
So let me get that up.
roll call.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Cliff
Jennifer.
Manuel.
Yes.
Jim Holton.
Yes.
Commissioner Mitten.
Yes.
Rich McLean.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
And Ron, are you on this morning? There you are. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Members, how you doing?
Like to recognize you for an update with our state legislative affairs.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be pretty brief. There's not much of an update since our last meeting, our last legislative meeting or board meeting for that matter. The governor does have the budget, received the budget last week. We expect him to probably act on the budget sometime early this week. We believe, based upon the conversations that myself and Alan Susky has been having with some of our friends in Tallahassee, that right now everybody's saying that all the right things about our appropriation line item. So at this point, I think we feel like we're in pretty good shape. I will tell you, we expect a record number of vetoes based upon where the economy is at this point. We're hearing upwards of $1 billion, so I think there will be a number of vetoes. I think there's a couple things that are in our favor. I think number one, our dollars are from the Transportation Trust Fund, so it's not recurring, it's not general revenue, which is good. Because if the governor did veto our line item, it's not like he can take the dollars from the Transportation Trust Fund and spend them on other items that's non-transportation related. So I think that's really kind of playing in our favor. And number two is we do have a track history with our appropriation line item. We have received state funding in the past. I think DOT and others are supportive of the direction that we're going as an organization. So again, I think I feel pretty good about where we are today. Again, there's obviously no guarantees in the public policy process, but again, what we're hearing out of Tallahassee at this point is I feel very good about where we are from an appropriation standpoint. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ron. Are there
comments?
Go ahead. Are there any questions for Ron this morning? Committee members? None? Thank you, Ron, very much for your update this morning. I'd like to recognize next Harry Glenn for our federal legislative update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, commissioners. Good morning, commissioners. I've got Steve Palmer is also on the line with us. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Hey, morning, commissioners. Steve Palmer and I are on the phone. We'd like to just give you a quick update. There are 4 major issues right now before the Congress. for the first time in a while, the House and the Senate are going to both be in session the same week this week. So their House comes back this week to work on a police reform measure. The Senate's going to also start working on that police reform measure. So that'll take up a considerable amount of time. The House last week spent a long time, 2 full days in committee doing a virtual committee markup session for the authorization of the 5-year authorization of the highway and transit program. Steve's going to talk about that in a minute. And the House will take that legislation up in the full House next week for 2 days next week before the 4th of July recess. 2 other issues. The House is on hold right now on any future, the Senate's on hold right now on any future consideration of a COVID relief bill. As you know, the House, I think Steve briefed you on at the last meeting, the House passed the HEROES Act in May to provide $3 trillion in assistance across all agencies and the economy. The Senate put that on hold, and Leader McConnell said they're not going to consider that bill until after they come back the 4th of July, which would be July 20th. So there's another couple of weeks until there's any further action on any COVID relief, and Steve and I can talk about that too. And then the 4th item up that was supposed to start actually today in the Senate is consideration of the annual appropriations bills. They're about 2 months behind schedule in that process because of the COVID relief. The Senate was supposed to start marking up those annual appropriations bills this week, but they ran into a hurdle last week that they didn't want to entertain amendments that the Democrats had planned to offer in the committee session. And so they decided to postpone any consideration of those bills at least this week and probably until after the 4th of July, until they can work with the Democrats on what amendments will and will not be offered. So that's on hold. The House has put out last week a pretty aggressive schedule to mark up their annual funding bills starting on January 6th when they come back after the 4th of July. And the bill that you all are most interested in that funds the transportation and transit programs will be marked up in the subcommittee on July 8th, which is a Thursday. And then the leader said last week and in a call with Congressman Christ on Thursday that they would get all of their appropriations work with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 of the 12 bills done by the end of July. And so they have a pretty aggressive schedule laid out for the rest of the year. I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Steve Palmer. He's going to talk a little bit about the big highway and transit authorization bill that's been the subject of a lot of debate this month.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Harry.
Chairman and members of the board. First, before I get to the reauthorization bill, just on Harry, one last postscript is while the committees are starting to mark up the bill, we do not expect there to be a bill until after the election, a final bill. So it will be a continuing resolution as of September 30th. And that's okay because the overall budget numbers for the federal government this year are only $5 billion more than last year. I mean, for fiscal year 21 over fiscal year 20. So there's not going to be a substantial change in any of the programs. Now, on the reauthorization bill, last week, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee did approve a 5-year, $494 billion surface transportation bill, highways, transit, and passenger rail. There's not enough revenue to pay for it out of the Highway Trust Fund. Neither does the Senate bill have enough money. They've got a highway title that they've approved last year. So both House and Senate need to come up with how they're going to pay for these bills. A little more detail on the House bill first, and that is that for transit, they're proposing a significant increase in funding up to $105 billion over 5 years. That is about a 40% increase for transit over current funding. And the good news is for TBARTA is they really put an emphasis on buses, on streamlining procurement, on focusing on ridership, and focusing on frequency of service. So there are incentives for transit agencies to increase the frequency of service and to make it easier for you to buy buses in the future. The bill was written without any Republican input. I should make clear about that. It was written by the Democrats, and you'll see why in a second. And it was approved then on a party line vote, 35 to 25 on Thursday. They had 2 days of markups, over almost 200 amendments. The reason for that was written by Chairman DeFazio and the Democrats is that on Thursday, before the bill was even done, Speaker Pelosi announced that on June 30th, the House will take up a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. Now, it will include this nearly $500 billion in surface transportation and transit, but it will also include money for broadband, schools, hospitals, housing, all sorts of infrastructure projects. So it's a messaging bill. It will pass the House, and it will pass after 2 or 3 days of debate, and then the Senate will have to figure out how it's going to take up reauthorization. One last little postscript on, well, two things real quick. One of them is the president last week, the senior staff at the Department of Transportation told us that the president will soon be announcing a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. That will be a 10-year bill instead of a 5-year bill. So it will be stretching out current programs. One little postscript on DeFazio's bill, the House bill, is that there is a division, a first 1-year extension of all programs with a plus up for COVID response. So if all else fails, I think the House plan is that they'll pass a current extension of transportation funding for 1 year under, and then on top of that, add another $5.8 billion for public transit. So the plan is at least to move ahead in a way that will help transit agencies across the board. And of course, like Harry mentioned, and I mentioned last month, the HEROES Act does have additional money for transit as well. So I think Congress is fully aware of the needs of public transportation and trying to find ways to address it as much as they can. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to turn it back to you and answer any questions.
Thank you, Steve. That was an excellent update, one of the better ones we've had recently. Are there any questions this morning for either Harry or federal legislative update? Questions or comments, anybody? We've gone through our agenda pretty quick this morning. I don't know if any board members want to visit on any topic. We could open it for that type of discussion. Otherwise, we'll have a few minutes to wait for our next committee meeting. See what happens when you schedule these on Monday morning? Silence. It's just slower to get going, David. Do you have anything this morning?
No, Chair.
David, did you have anything?
No, I don't. Nothing to add.
All right. Well, then we'll adjourn the legislative committee and thank those that participated, especially Ron, Harry, and Steve, for your updates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll put the meeting on hold, and we'll leave this window open for the finance meeting, which will begin in about 20 minutes.
Hey, Chris,
Yes, Jennifer.
I just wanted to give you a heads up that Commissioner Bellamy will be chairing the next meeting because Janet is not able to make it.
He will be chairing.
Correct.
Very good. I'll be on the lookout for him as well, too. I was working with David on his audio. I think he's going to, I'm going to correct the spelling of your name, too. But I'll be on the lookout for him. Let me look real quick here. I haven't seen him. Sometimes he calls in and I admit him.
Yeah.
Not
I
seeing him.
thought I'd tell you.
All right, good to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, I'm unmuted now, so how does this sound on your end?
This sounds much better. This would certainly be usable.
Okay, perfect.
So we're all good.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Debbie Leos, can you hear me now? I've admitted you to the meeting, so I think you should be able to speak.
Thank you, Chris. Can you hear me just fine?
I can. You're good.
Guys, why don't we get going? I think it is 9 o'clock now, and I'm going to chair the meeting since I guess Janet and Reggie are both distracted.
Very good.
Okay, I'll call the committee meeting to order. Jennifer, can you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Jim Holton.
Here.
Commissioner Long is absent. Rich McLean.
Here.
Commissioner Starkey.
I'm here.
Commissioner Mitten.
I'm here.
And then Commissioner Bellamy is not on yet, but let's see. Cliff Manuel.
I see him here, but don't hear from him yet. He's still muted.
Okay. We definitely will need him to join in order to have a quorum.
Okay.
Try to unmute him. I'm not able to unmute his microphone.
Can someone text him? David, perhaps text him to see if he can unmute.
I am doing that right now.
And Alan, I do know that Rich McLean is not officially a member of this committee. I didn't know if there was any way he could count towards quorum if we decided to add him on.
You were muted, Alan.
Yep, I'm trying. I was for some reason not responding. No, we can't. We can't count him if he's not a member of the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, if you wanted, you could go to the discussion on the May 2020 financials and come back and do the minutes.
Yeah, we haven't had public comment yet, so why don't we, Jennifer, is there any public comment?
Not from my end. Cindy is monitoring that. Cindy, do you have any public comments?
Hi, I do not have anybody on the phone line for public comment at this time.
Okay, good. Well, per Alan's suggestion, we'll move on. Item number 4 is information items. Are there any informations items from David or anyone?
No, I have no information items.
Okay, none being heard, we'll move on to a presentation of the May 2020 financials. And Melanie, you're recognized.
Good morning, everyone. So can everyone hear me? So the May of at the year to date through the May of for the month of May, we had a net surplus of $135,000. Now this $135,000 was $166,000 under the budget amount of $301,000. If we look here at the revenues, we were under budget of approximately $2.6 million. Now this under budget was due to the timing of the PD&E and technology study. Looking here at the expenses, we were also under budget by approximately $2.4 million. And here we were under budget in pretty much all the categories, emphasizing here on primarily due to the professional services related to that PD&E and technology study. Moving on to the balance sheet, at the end of May 2020, our accounts receivable balance was approximately $577,000. Offset by the accounts payable of $303,000. At the end of May, we had approximately $182,000 in the bank as cash. And that pretty much concludes my summary for May 2020.
Thank you, Melanie. Any questions from members?
Commissioner John Mitten, Chair John Mitten, I did have a question on the balance sheet.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You're right.
So down at the bottom, under equity, you have net assets with a negative balance. And I was curious to hear more about that.
So the net asset is basically the liability, the assets and the liabilities, and that gives you the net assets. That is basically a rolling from the beginning of TBARTA when it started. And so that's approximately what our net assets is from the day that TBARTA originated. And
so would a negative asset balance be a liability?
No, it's not a liability. It's actually the difference between the asset and the liability will give you your equity, which is the net asset is part of your equity. And when we're going to go over to in the next presentation, we'll be discussing the 2019 audit, and CLA will give a better explanation of what is included in the net asset for your 2019 audit.
Okay, thank you. It was just interesting. I rarely ever see a negative in an asset line, so I was just curious. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions? Okay, none being heard, we'll move on to the audit results, and CLA is recognized to brief us on that.
And Lance, are you there?
I am, yes. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
All right, thank you. Members of the Finance Committee, it's a pleasure to be here today. Just for the record, my name is Lance Schmidt, and I'm an engagement principal with CLA. We served as your auditors this year for the year ended September 30, 2019. So you should have had in your board package a couple of items. One would be the audited financial statements. And then secondly, you should also have received what we call the governance letter, but basically a letter to the board covering all of our required communication with governance. So rather than reading those approximately 40 or 50 pages to you, I figured we would use this presentation to give you the key highlights of the audit, both the results and some of the key matters of the audit. Also today, I did also want to recognize that we do have Danny Springfells as well that is with us. She served as the engagement director on the audit this year and assisted myself along with other members of the team on making sure that we were able to issue the audit on time and also provide a high quality audit. So with that, we'll jump right into the presentation. And I will say at any time, if anyone has any questions, please let me know. And Chris, if you'll let me know if there's questions, I'll go ahead and stop and take those as they come up. Did want to start off first of all by saying this presentation is highly summarized, and we're just going to touch on some of the key points. I do recommend that you take a look at your financial statements, both the audit reports and the actual financial statements themselves, and make sure that you read through that and take everything I say in context with both the full governance letter and the audited financial statements. So with that, if we can go to the next slide. So I want to recap exactly what you've hired us to do as your auditors. The first is what you typically would think of. We audit the financial statements, both the numbers and the footnotes, to ensure that those are correct. And so we've done that as of September 30, 2019. In addition to that, we also perform a state single audit. There are two types of single audit. There's federal and state single audit this year. We didn't have any federal programs that had enough expenditures that rose to the level of being required to be tested. However, we did have one state program that needed to be tested, and that was the Florida Commuter Assistance Program Rideshare Grant. And so when we talk about this specific program, we actually are talking about looking at well beyond just the numbers, but we're actually looking at compliance, reporting, eligibility, et cetera. So there's a lot that goes into our compliance piece of the audit. And then lastly, we also perform an agreed upon procedures similar to an audit, with the exception that it's very narrow in scope, meaning that we're performing certain procedures that are requested by us. And for that National Transit Database report, we're actually looking at both internal controls and other performance measures to make sure the information that you're reporting is accurate and correct. So I want to recap our reports that we issue, and then also the findings of our auditing procedures. So first of all, I mentioned we audit the financial statements of TBARTA. We do issue an opinion on that one. Glad to report that you had an unmodified opinion. And an unmodified opinion basically means that we were able to say everything is materially correct, and we didn't have to say except for. And since there were no exceptions or modifications to that standard opinion, we use the term unmodified. So again, this is we commonly refer to as a clean audit report. So again, congratulations to management on that. That is something that is earned and not just given out. So again, good news there. Secondly, we issue an independent auditor's report on internal controls. So we're making sure that there are proper internal controls in place over preparing the financial statements I just mentioned. If we had any findings there, we'd be required to report those. And I'm glad to report that we had no findings to report. And then lastly, we also issue a single audit report, again, this year over the state program. Very similar to the audit of the financials. Here we're auditing compliance. And so we had an unmodified opinion on TBARTA's compliance with all the rules and regulations of the program that I mentioned. And so again, very good news there. That's not always the case. Many organizations, when it comes to compliance, do have findings. But again, very good news that there were no findings for TBARTA for the year ended September 30, 2019. I mentioned that both for the financial audit and compliance audit, we had no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, so no findings. We also do issue a management letter. And so in the management letter, that's typically where we'll report either other items that we see or best practices, recommendations, etc. And so this year we had 4 comments that we had included in the management letter. Proper reporting of capital assets, making sure that all journal entries have evidence of approval. Thirdly, looking at the timely preparation and adequate review of bank reconciliations, making sure those are being done timely. There was some transition during the year. So those second and third comments somewhat were impacted by some of the transitions that took place during the year. And then lastly, budgetary control. We did notice that the organization did overexpend the budget, and so we just recommend that budget tool be used as a good management resource and be updated on a regular basis throughout the year. Again, assuming that there's going to be significant changes to the budget. And so with that, if there's any questions, I'll take that. If not, we'll move on to the next slide. So I mentioned that there was a governance letter that was included in your board package. I want to just recap some of the highlights of that rather than reading that document to you. If we had, kind of starting on the right, if we had any difficulties encountered performing our audit, we'd be required to report those to you. We were in the middle of the audit when COVID-19 became an actual thing. So we certainly had some challenges there, but again, no significant difficulties that impacted our delivery or timely delivery of the audit. If we had any corrected or uncorrected misstatements, those would be reported to you in writing in the governance letter. If we had any disagreements with management, and so here we're talking about either items of professional judgment or conclusions on findings, etc. If we had disagreements, we'd be required to report those to the board. I mean, we are not aware of any. We do receive a management representation letter. So we asked both David and Melanie to sign that, stating that the financial statements are true and accurate. And if there were any other consultations with other CPA firms on accounting or compliance related matters, that CPA firm is required to get with us first to make sure they have all the facts. If we had any of those, we'd report those to you, but we're not aware of any second opinions or consultations with other CPA firms. And then as it relates to the qualitative aspects of the financial statements, we recommend that you obviously look at the footnotes and read the significant, all the footnotes are significant. If they're in there, we recommend that you read that to better understand the numbers that are on the actual financials. If we can go to the next slide. Just to recap, kind of just at a very high level, some of the significant aspects of our audit. We do look at key transaction cycles. So we're looking at various internal control cycles to make sure that proper procedures are in place. We previously had mentioned in the management letter just some best practices and things that that could improve or strengthen internal controls. But these are some of the key areas. We obviously look at the entity-wide level controls, making sure that there's effective governance and an effective board and committees. We're looking at obviously the reconciliation of cash, revenues and receivables, payroll and benefits, expenditures and accounts payable, and then ultimately financial reporting and close. And the way that we look at those key transaction cycles is really by using our audit approach, where we're first of all just doing a lot of interviews and walkthroughs. So we're not just relying on inquiries, but we're actually looking at documentation. From there, with those key transaction cycles, we do a risk assessment. We plan our audit of the more significant areas. From there, we actually capture all of your general ledger activity, all your financial activity. We import into our system, perform data analysis on that, and then use that throughout the course of our audit. We also perform substandard procedures where we're either confirming with third parties or looking at supporting documentation that originates outside the organization to support our audit. And then ultimately that concludes in both our reporting and conclusion on the financial statements. So again, a lot of pieces to the audit, a lot of coordination between TBARTA's management team and the external auditors. And so I want to give you a couple of financial highlights as it relates to the audit. Again, with the financial statements, they should tell a story and kind of tell the status or the state of the organization. And so I want to take the next couple of slides and just give you a couple of those highlights. So taking a look at the general fund is on a modified accrual basis. So this is not going to have any of your capital assets or depreciation. And it's really reflective, very similar to a cash basis or near-term perspective. So it doesn't happen shortly after year end. We don't include those transactions at this level. And entity-wide, however, we do include all of those transactions on a full accrual basis. So again, if you take a look at the expenditure trend for the general fund, you can see that there are increases in both transportation expenses and capital outlay. Biggest increase in expenses here really is due to salaries, payroll, and also consulting expenses. As everyone knows, TBARTA is kind of on a upward trajectory in terms of getting programs off the ground, and so that's why you'll see that upward trend. And so you may say, okay, well, how are we paying for those expenses? Well, currently, if you take a look at the screenshot to the right, you'll see that the source of funds really comes from federal and state grants primarily, with 84% of the funding coming from those external, I'll say external, but not necessarily internally generated revenues sources from federal and state grants, and then local contributions make up the difference of approximately 16%. And so those are your two or three primary sources of revenue. Taking a look at the statement of net position. So again, this is at the entity-wide level. This does include capital assets at this point, where we take it from modified to full accrual. And so if you take a look here, you can see kind of the trend from 2017 through 2019. We do have both an increase in assets overall. One important thing that you will probably note, and I wanted to make sure that I highlighted it, especially those of you that work with other governments, for the 2019 year, it was the first year that TBARTA participated in the Florida Retirement System pension plan. And so that was new. Previous to that, it was a 403B plan. Now participants are eligible to receive this FRS retirement benefits. And so as a result of that, it significantly increases your footnotes. You have a lot more pages in there that talk about FRS, and it talks about all the estimates that go into that, and even the sensitivity analysis of what happens if the market underperforms or overperforms, or we have significant changes in the discount rate related to that liability. You'll find all those footnotes in there this year that were not there last year because of this being the first year that TBARTA participated in that FRS program. And so again, that netted to about $176,000 net pension liability. Also, you'll see that the accounts receivable had a high balance at the end of the year. And so that's included in the current and other current assets. You'll see that in the financial statements. Danny and I were just commenting that it sounded in the most recent update that obviously largely a lot of those grant receivables have been collected. And that's primarily what makes up the accounts receivable are amounts due from grantor agencies. So again, making sure that that's being kept up with on a timely basis is obviously imperative for good cash flow management for TBARTA. And so I'm glad to hear that that number has gone down. That's great news. And so I know there was a comment or a question earlier about the unrestricted, or I shouldn't say unrestricted, but just the net position or net asset balance. We use the term net position at the statement of net position level. And this really is the difference between, basically, I like to say it's the difference between what you own as an asset, so whether that be receivables or capital assets or cash, and the difference between that and the liabilities that you have. Many of the liabilities that you will see recorded on the balance or the statement of net position or on the statement of fund balance are related to grants. So in some cases, it's either unearned revenue or amounts received at the general fund level for unavailable revenue, which are not truly liabilities, but rather just timing differences that upon the passage of time, those deferred inflows and liabilities will be recognized as revenue. So again, just any questions on any of the financial statements, whether it be the numbers or anything reported in the slide deck here, I'd be glad to take any of those questions.
Members, questions?
If not, Chris, if we can go to the next slide. Just want to put a couple of things on your radar. We do have some new accounting standards that are coming out. The most significant one for TBARTA will be a new lease standard. That's actually been delayed a year due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and so there's an extra year of implementation due to GASB 95 on that. There are some other GASBs coming out, but currently there won't be a huge impact on TBARTA's financial statements as a result of those. If we go to the next slide, Chris. I did just want to again publicly say thank you to Melanie, Debbie, and David and their entire team as it relates to the audit. It does, our audit extends far beyond just the accounting department, and so I do want to say thank you to the entire organization. And you can see the team there that we had working on this. And again, just if there's any questions at all, I'd be glad to take those at this time, or any other comments I could address.
Chair, this is John Mitten. Just had a couple of comments or questions, and if you could, maybe we could have a little bit of dialogue on the fund balance. I see that it's in an unfavorable position, and maybe juxtapose that with our unearned revenue playing into that, if there's any relation. And the reason why I ask is, of course, is the best lobbyist tool is the stewardship of the money that's given to us. And so I just want to, as we go into the budget signings and things like that, as we go through and work through, we add personnel, and we're trying to move these studies through and move TBARTA forward as we should, to do it in a position of excellence is obviously the desire of everyone. And so if you could just talk a little bit about those two things, and maybe assuage some of my concerns as to the snapshot of, if I'm a legislator and I'm looking at the numbers, or if I'm staff of a legislator looking at the numbers, how I might be able to see good things in this, perhaps not something quite as unfavorable.
Certainly. And if I will direct you to the financial statements, if everyone wanted to take a look at page 13 of the financial statements. It's page, if you have just the financial statement PDF file, it's page 16. That's page 13 on the bottom. This is your balance sheet for your general fund. And as you take a look at the balance sheet for the general fund, you'll notice two things. The first is probably the easiest one first. There's a deferred inflow of resources that is listed there, and it's called unavailable revenues. And so if you take a look at that unavailable revenue number, it is $822,784. I just want to point out what's actually on the screen now is the statement of net position, which is the full accrual line. And so when you're looking at the general fund, that $822,784 represents money, basically grant revenue that has been received that was not received within 60 days of year end. And so the way this works for governments is at the fund level, if the resources don't come in within a near-term basis, then we basically say, hey, it's not really available for this year, and it needs to be listed as unavailable revenue. And so you'll notice for your fund balance report, you have a negative, for your general fund, you have a negative $890,000 of unassigned fund balance. So right off the bat, $822,000 relates to money that was ultimately received. It just wasn't received within 60 days. And so the question may be, why was that the case? Why wasn't that received within 60 days? And so, and again, we specifically looked for this during the course of our audit to make sure we had this properly reported. And a lot of that just had to do with, making sure that information being submitted to the grantor was just in the exact format they wanted it. All the questions were answered. They won't reimburse until all of their concerns are addressed before they release the money. And so, we noted that obviously the money did come in, or else we wouldn't have allowed the receivable to be reported. But again, that makes up a good portion of your negative fund balance in the general fund. Secondly, you also have unearned revenue, meaning that money has been received that has simply not been put to use yet. There's two types of reimbursement, or there's two types of grants. There's the grants where you actually receive an advance up front and then spend the money down, and then there's other grants where they are reimbursement basis grants. So in this case, money had basically been advanced to TBARTA, but had not been fully spent down for the projects, which again, depending on the dollar amounts, in this case, the dollar amounts are relatively large for TBARTA. That does take time to kind of spend that down and make sure all of that is, one, being spent on correct sources, but also, procured, spent down, et cetera. So if you add those two together, that gets you to roughly $1.2 million of liabilities. And so typically when you think of liabilities, think of things that you have to pay out. So like a mortgage or accounts payable, or you're actually paying money out. In this case, either there's been a receivable that just wasn't received timely, and so we don't recognize the revenue, and instead we recognize liability. So just over the course of time, that liability will roll off, or it represents money that's actually been received that hasn't been spent yet. And so I will say, when you take a look at the general fund, it's a little bit unusual that you would see this. And a lot of it just had to do with, again, just some of the, kind of working with the grantor agencies, and even some of, just making sure that every question was answered before that money was either dispersed to TBARTA, or actually in this case, on the unearned revenue spent. So I know I just rattled on for a while, so I don't know if that answers the questions or if there's any additional concerns I might be able to address.
Yes, it answers the question, and I appreciate you helping us get all on the same page. I think it's important we all understand as we're looking at these numbers what they represent, and that makes that helps to clarify the unfavorable position. Thank you.
Certainly.
Other questions? And Lance, to John's point, I think that it might be a good idea, an executive summary or otherwise, to maybe as we go forward, annotate certain concerns like that and point out that they're not really an enterprise risk, but a matter of deferral of receipt of revenue due to regulatory issues. And especially in a time of COVID, I think it's important to do those type of things.
Oh, certainly. No, it's we could definitely certainly do that. So I do appreciate it. I did also just want to let Finance Committee know, and I know many of you will be on the board meeting after this. We actually have 2 board meetings going on at 10 a.m. So I wanted to make sure I kind of gave the deep dive to the Finance Committee, but Danny Springfells will be presenting at the full board meeting.
Thanks so much. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Lance.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Jennifer, do we have a quorum now for purposes of voting on the prior minutes?
We do. Cliff, are you there now?
Yes, I'm present. Thank you.
Okay, great. Do we have a motion to accept prior minutes?
So moved. John Mitten.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? None being heard. Jennifer, please call the roll.
Okay. Jim Holton,
Yes?
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
Commissioner John Mitten.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 4-0.
Chairman Holden, Chris Jadek, like to be
Yes.
recognized.
Yes, please.
I did admit a Bradenton phone number to the meeting. I'm not sure if that is Commissioner Bellamy, but Commissioner Bellamy, can you hear us? That may not be him. I thought that might be him, and I wanted to, if he was part of this meeting, wanted to give him a chance to speak up if he was in attendance.
Okay.
But that may not be him. Sorry.
Continue on, please, Jennifer.
Okay, so the motion did pass 4-0.
Okay, minutes passed. We'll move on to any other business. Is there any other business to come before the good of the order? Okay, none being heard. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion, Commissioner Starkey.
Thank you, Commissioner Starkey. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
And so it is 9:30, so we could proceed with the policy committee meeting whenever we're ready to go.
And Chris, thank you. This is Rich McLean, and I'll go ahead and call to order the June Policy Committee meeting for 22 June. Cindy, do we have any public comments?
We do not have anyone on the line at this time for public comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Appreciate that. We'll move right on to step 3, consent agenda item. We only have one item, and that's the May 2020 Policy Committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion there?
Move to approve. Jim Holton.
Okay, thank you.
Second, Commissioner Starkey.
Thank you, Commissioner Starkey. We have a motion and a second. Jennifer, do you want to take roll?
Well, I need to take roll before we start anything
Yeah, okay.
for the meeting. Okay. Chair Holton.
Here.
Cliff Manuel.
Here.
Rich McLean.
Present.
Commissioner Starkey.
Here.
Commissioner Bellamy. Commissioner John Mitten.
Here.
All right, we do have a quorum, so let me just apply this. And I will go ahead and now take the vote for the minutes.
Thank you.
Jim Holton.
Yes.
Cliff Manuel.
Yes.
Rich McLean.
Yes.
Commissioner Starkey.
Yes.
And Commissioner Mitten.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And we'll move right into item 4, which is information item. We do have one information item. That's the draft ATASP safety plan. And I'll turn that over to Brian if you're ready, Brian.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, a point of clarification. The staff report says this is an action item, or the report that went with it said it was an action item, but it will be an action item in July because we'll be bringing the safety plan to the board in July for approval, and we'll be coming back to this committee in July as well to seek your recommendation for approval to the board. But for today, it's just an information item. We want to give you a chance to look over the plan before July. With that being said, in July 2018, the Federal Transit Administration published the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan Final Rule, which requires that certain operators of public transportation systems that receive federal funds develop safety plans. The original compliance deadline was July 20th of this year. In April, the acting administrator for FTA extended the compliance deadline to December 31st of 2020. TBARTA contracted with the Center for Urban Transportation Research at USF to help us write our safety plan. The plan is done. It's compliant with the FTA rule. Some highlights of our safety plan include the designation of Miss Cindy Raskin as TBARTA's Chief Safety Officer, the creation of a TBARTA safety team, which will be composed of Miss Raskin, myself as the principal planner, Jennifer Mendez, the executive assistant, and a representative from Enterprise. And this team will meet on a quarterly basis. It also includes the establishment of an employee safety reporting program. TBARTA employees can raise safety concerns without fear of retaliation by calling a newly created TBARTA safety hotline or sending an email to safety@tbarta.com. Those voicemails and emails will go directly to Cindy. Members of the Regional Van Pool program can use that number and email address as well to raise safety concerns. And then a final important part of the safety plan is the establishment of 8 safety performance targets for the Regional Van Pool program. Those 8 performance targets include the number of fatalities, injuries, safety events, and mechanical system failures, as well as the rate of those 4 things per 100,000 vehicle revenue miles. We developed these targets based on a review of our historical data. Because the Van Pool program has been so safe, we've been able to set our targets for all 8 of those measures to 0. The safety team will review these measures on an annual basis. So that's the plan in a nutshell. Like I said, we will come back to this committee in July to seek your recommendation of approval to the board. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions you have.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And I'll just state that everybody does have a copy of that, and I would ask that you at least peruse that, the copy you have, so that we can talk in earnest at the next committee meeting. So, any questions at this time, though, from anybody on the line? Okay, Brian, thank you. Good job. I appreciate it. And we look forward to that full discussion at the July committee meeting. We'll move on to the next item, which is discussions and action items. Do we have any additional discussion items or action items? Seeing none, we'll move on. Other business by chance? Future meeting subjects, we just heard from Brian. We'll definitely talk that subject again in July. So that's one right there. David, I don't know if I'm missing anything for the upcoming July committee meeting except the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan that Brian mentioned.
We will be discussing the Envision 2030 Regional Transit Development Plan during the board meeting this morning. So there is a good possibility that we will discuss the path forward during the policy committee meeting in July in order to get as much input from stakeholders and regional partners as we possibly can, and to just discuss how we go about doing that.
Okay, all right. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. With that said, I'll just open it up for any last comments or questions or discussion items before we go ahead and adjourn. Okay, hearing nothing, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And therefore, we are adjourned, waiting for the board meeting at 10. Thank you.
I'll put our slate up and we'll reconvene. I'll leave this meeting line open for anybody who wants to put this on pause, and we'll reconvene at closer to 10 o'clock.
Hey, Chris, do we have the chat capability?
I have disabled the chat because it becomes part of public record. So we've, and that's kind of following the advice of others who've used Zoom for public meetings. I have disabled that.
Okay, the question I have is I see on the agenda, the Citizens Advisory Committee is almost at the very end. Although there is one of the recommendations that we have that are related to item 6B on the agenda, which comes before our report. Should we give that during, should I give that during public comment on the regional rapid transit?
Did you, in public comment, was that somebody who, in other words, it's the committee's recommendation, right? That's really not public comment, I would say.
Yes.
But it relates before, I was just saying is it relates to Vision 2030, which will come up before we get to your report, correct?
It's not Vision 2030, but it's the next item.
Right. But what you want to speak to is, if I understand correctly, you want to speak to Envision 2030 because by the time we get to your report, that action item will have already been considered, correct?
Envision 2030 is item 6A.
Right.
The one that we have a specific recommendation on is 6B, the Regional Rapid Transit Milestone 2.
I see. I would suggest, and the chair can correct me and certainly Jennifer can, I would not bring it up in public comment because it's not public comment. I would say after Scott gives his presentation, Scott Pringle will give a presentation. The chair will ask if anybody has any comments. I would ask for recognition then.
Great, I will do that.
Right.
Hey, Chris and Bill, I actually do have a caller on the line for public comment for the RRT action item. So at the beginning of the meeting, when Chair Holton asked for general public comment, I was going to mention those other public comment items, and I can mention that Bill has comment from CAC as well, if you like.
You know what I think, and second thought, Bill, I think that's probably a good thing to do. So yes, I would speak up then. Since Cindy's going to talk about other folks, it's probably a good thing to do.
All right, I'll just
let's do that.
Address that specific item. Great, okay.
Hey, Chris, this is Commissioner Long. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good, because I can't see any of the members that are here. I
stopped the panel share. You should be able to see some of us now.
No, I can't. Let's see. Oh yeah, now I can. Thank you. Okay, we're good. Just wanted to make sure since I missed the committee meetings this morning. I apologize.
Sure. Commissioner Long, I see your hand is raised.
I just wanted to see if you were paying attention because I just learned how to do that about 10 days ago.
There you go.
All right. So is that how we're going to get your attention today? Because every time we use this, we learn something different. Hi, Jim.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have in other meetings, some people have used it and other people, it's really at the discretion of the chair. Some people ask for verbally ask for recognition, and that works pretty well. I keep an eye out if I see a hand up and the chair doesn't see that, I will kind of jump in and say, hey, so-and-so would like recognition. So it's really up to Chair Holden how he'd like to proceed. But if somebody does raise their hand, I do point it out.
Just wanted to see if you were paying attention. Thank you.
Chris, are we all set to go?
I do believe we are, and it is 10 o'clock by my clock, so we can proceed.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the June 22nd TBARTA board meeting. Let's commence. I'll call the meeting to order, and Jennifer, please call the roll.
Jim Holson,
Here.
Cliff Manuel, Cliff, are you there? Commissioner Janet Long.
I'm here. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Mayor Jane Castor. Mayor Rick Kreisman.
I see he is on, but he does not appear to have a microphone. So I'm not sure if he's able to hear us. He may not be connected just yet.
Okay. Rich McLean.
Here.
Commissioner Kemp.
I do not see Commissioner Kemp. I do believe her aide might have been on board, but I do not see Commissioner Kemp.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey,
Here.
Commissioner Bellamy, Commissioner Mitten,
Here.
Commissioner Karen Seal,
Here.
David Gwynn, you
Just
see him.
let you know that Secretary Gwynn is online, but he can't hear anything.
Oh, no.
I do see, according, he might have to make sure he is connected with computer audio. Sometimes that's what I find. You have to click that. I'm seeing his, I see him there and I see his microphone, but I'm unable to give him any more control. So it might be something on his end if he's not able to hear that.
Okay. For now, I'll go ahead and continue on. Secretary Nandam.
This is Paul Simmons filling in for Secretary Nadam.
Jennifer, I'd like to vote present. Got my audio working now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I do see, Jennifer, just one note. I do see that Commissioner Kemp appears to be logging in now. I do not have any audio from her yet, but I see her camera's been hooked up, so she may be in the process of trying to join us. And if you give me a minute here, I think Commissioner Kemp looks like she's probably logging in now, so you can see if Commissioner Kemp, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Hey, this is David Gwynn. I think you were calling me. Hopefully you can hear me now. I can hear you now.
We can. Okay, and I see that Mayor Kreisman joined as well. I see him there now on the screen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so we can go ahead and proceed. We do have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for that. Welcome, members. First order of business is public comment. We've received any public comments.
Good morning, Cindy Raskin with TBARTA. I have the public comment line open. There are no public comments for your general public comment section at this time. However, when you get to action items, I do have a letter to read into the record for the RTVP item, and I do have a caller on the line for the regional rapid transit item. And Mr. Johnson, your former chair of the CAC, also had a comment for the RRT.
Okay, great. So we'll reserve those comments until that time. Okay, moving on. The next item is the consent agenda item, which the only thing today is the prior board meetings. Are there any corrections or additions? I'll accept a motion to approve.
Move to approve. This is Commissioner Starkey.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Jennifer, please call the roll.
Jim Holton,
Yes?
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Mayor Rick Kreisman,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp,
Yes.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey,
Yes.
Commissioner John Mitten,
Yes.
Commissioner Karen Seal, we did have her earlier, so maybe she had to jump off.
I see her mic is muted, so I do see her there, as well as Mayor Castor, just so you know.
Okay. Mayor Castor, did you want to vote on this, the minutes for this month? Okay. Hey, I'm not hearing anything from Mayor Castor.
This is Ian Whitney with Mayor Castor's office. She actually had to step away for a few moments.
Okay, it's okay. She doesn't need to vote on this right now. We do have a quorum with the amount that did vote, so I'll just go ahead and let you know, Chair, that this motion has passed.
Well, okay, thank you for that, and we understand that there's temporary disruptions here. Okay, so we'll move on. The next item is the information items, and the chair recognizes Cindy Raskin.
Morning. Thank you, everybody. As I mentioned before, my name is Cindy Raskin. I am your Director of Commuter Services. I just wanted to give you an update today about some of the activities that we've been working on over the past several months. So I have a few presentation slides for you here. Chris, if you can go to the next slide, please. So just a reminder, the Commuter Services Program, which we've rebranded Commute Tampa Bay, is a program that's funded by District 7 of the Florida Department of Transportation. We work with commuters directly and with employers to help create programs to assist travelers finding a way to work other than driving in the car by themselves. So we have carpool, vanpool, biking, walking, public transit, and telecommuting. And of course, telecommuting has been getting lots of attention lately. We launched this new ride matching app earlier in the year. It allows our customers to download the app or log into their account on the computer and find matches for carpools and vanpools. It allows them to log their trips, and each day that they log a commute trip, they earn 200 points. Those points they can redeem for various discounts. There's restaurants, retail, there's some online opportunities. Pizza seems to be a very popular one. And one of my favorites I've seen so far is a discount on a gallon of Sherwin-Williams paint. So people at home telecommuting, turning in their points, and doing some painting in their rooms. It's also how we manage our emergency ride home program is through this app. Next slide, Chris. So here's some stats since we launched the app in February. We've added 800 new members to the database. We've had 22,000 trips that were logged, and we had 146 rewards redeemed. So that's people turning in their points in order to get their rewards. So it's a pretty good increase here, and we keep seeing that number go up. We check it just about every week, and we see the number going up and up. So that's very positive. Next slide. One of the promotions that we did recently in the month of May, our app provider approached us and said, hey, what do you think about doing a promotion where when we get 700 recorded telecommutes, we make a donation to Feeding Tampa Bay. So they actually made the donation, and we way surpassed the 700 that they suggested. We ended up with over 1,200 telework trips that were logged in the month of May. So the donation was made to Feeding Tampa Bay before the end of the month was even over. So this was a great opportunity for our commuters that are working from home to earn some points, and then also help us make this donation with our partner for our community. We're looking at doing some other promotions too later on in the year. In October, we're going to be doing a promotion called Green Your Commute. It'll be a regional competition where we encourage people to try different modes. So as we work towards that, we'll have more information for you for that in the future. Best Workplaces for Commuters. If you're not familiar with that program, it's a national program that's operated by Qatar, and it recognizes employers who meet certain guidelines for providing commute benefits for their employees. There are 19 Tampa Bay company and organizations that have been recognized for the 2020 year, and 2021's list registration period is open now, and we're working on renewing these 19 organizations and also adding new ones. We've added about 4 new ones in the past couple of months, and my team has a goal of adding 20 more over the next year. Next slide, please. In the meantime, since that Best Workplaces for Commuter list is only put out annually, we decided to create our own commuter-friendly certificate that we can present to the partners that we work with different levels. So basically, you know, silver is they're providing information to their employees. Gold is they're working towards providing not just information for their employees, but a more active role in working with their employees to offer commute alternatives. And then platinum level is people who are already registered for Best Workplaces or on their way to being certified for that. And then we also have a neighborhood designation. Some of our account executives have found success in reaching out to communities and neighborhoods and approaching them for potential carpool matches rather than starting at the employer. So this is a great way for us to provide local recognition in addition to that national recognition from best workplaces for commuters. Next slide, please. One really great thing we did at the end of April in light of the pandemic, we worked with Florida Department of Transportation. We're District 7, we worked with District 1 and District 5 to put together a series of 3 telework webinars. We partnered also with Qatar. They allowed us to use their Adobe Connect platform, and they facilitated that for us. So we had a series of 3 webinars. We had professionals in the industry, especially teleworking and telework technology folks, sharing this information with the public and with our users. It was very successful. We found people had great value in learning this information. So we're looking at either on our own or perhaps partnering again with District 1 and District 5, putting on more webinars over the next year. So we're looking for those trainers and topics that people will be interested in. Next slide, please. Vanpool branding. You know, when we decided to rebrand this program to Commute Tampa Bay, one of the really exciting things we got to do is start working on rebranding the vans. So this is an example of one of the Commute Tampa Bay SUVs that's owned and leased by Enterprise for our Vanpool partners. To date, as of last Friday, we had 56 of the vans, 56 out of 168 that had received the new branding. So the team's going out and doing those as quickly as they can, and hopefully within a couple of months, we'll have the entire fleet rebranded with the Commute Tampa Bay logo. It looks really great. We have a version also on, the vehicles usually are black or white, and on the black version, you can really see the white outline that's around the whole logo. It looks really nice. Next slide, please. Okay, this is very exciting. The Manatee partnership, we've been working together with District 1 to figure out a way to help them with their Vanpool and their commuter services program. Since Manatee is part of TBARTA, but it's not part of FTO District 7, there's a little bit of a disconnect sometimes with where the folks in Manatee felt like they belonged. So I've been working very closely with Paul and Michelle in FDOT, and Annie Araguea, who's the commute manager for Commute Connector in District 1, to put together an opportunity for us to work together. So we are going to be working together as soon as we can have meetings in person again. Our sales teams are going to get together and hammer out a strategy of who we want to talk to and how we want that all to work. But basically, we're going to be offering all of our services in addition to all of the Commute Connector services. Commute Connector has changed their emergency ride home program to match ours. And it's going to be a great partnership. We're really looking forward to the opportunity to work together. My Pinellas and Hillsborough sales representatives will be able to go down into Manatee together with Annie and offer both programs to our friends to the south. So that is my update. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Cindy. Members, questions for Cindy? Thanks for that great presentation, and I look forward to hearing more great reports about these collaborations around the area. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Next item is item 6, and we are going to first hear from David Green on Envision 2030. David, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are pleased to present you today the final Envision 2030 Regional Transit Development Plan. You may recall we presented a draft plan at our April board meeting and then opened a public comment period. Our presentation today reflects updates based on comments and feedback that we received during that time. So I'm going to turn it over in a moment to Bill Ball from Tyndale Oliver to go through that presentation with you. But first, we'd like to share a video that explains why such a plan is needed.
It's another beautiful morning in Tampa Bay, one of the world's best places to live and work and play. More than just a community, we're a vibrant and diverse region of nearly 3.5 million people who can't always get where we want to go.
Crash on Adamo Drive, that'll be westbound at 78th Street to watch out for. We do have heavy
Like many growing areas, Tampa Bay needs and wants world-class regional transit to connect people and places. But unlike others, we have yet to figure it out.
I hate driving down 275. I don't go to Tampa, like downtown Tampa. I don't go to West Shore area and all that in the mornings when I can avoid it. I rarely go because if I'm going to go there in the morning or try to come back from there in the afternoon, it's way too much traffic.
Hello, I'm John Wilson. I've lived here more than 35 years. For me and my family, this is home, and it always will be. But we have to do something about transportation. It's become an issue for all of us. And while this is such a good place to live, it could be great if we work together as a region, as one Tampa Bay area. And when it comes to transportation problems, that's exactly why we have TBARTA, the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority, serving Hernando, Hillsborough, Manatee, Pasco, and Pinellas counties, created by the Florida legislature to improve economic vitality through regional transportation. And now there's a plan. Envision 2030, TBARTA's vision to develop a region-wide world-class transit network over the coming decade.
I think it is the best option for us to continue to be a place where people want to work, live, and raise their families.
And we are Americans. We are part of the economy. We vote. We have places to go. We work. We need to get to work.
Access to jobs. It's a fundamental goal of Envision 2030, to improve regional vitality by getting you where you need to go, quickly, economically, and safely. Tampa Bay already has a strong alliance of local transit providers, each committed to best serving local customers. But increasingly, more of us need to cross county lines to get back and forth to work. Each weekday, nearly 1.5 million people drive or ride in cars county to county. The objective of Envision 2030 is to work with local transit providers to better connect all of us across the entire Tampa Bay region.
Public transportation is a great thing. I mean, if you live in a large area, this is actually a fairly large area if you want to look at the entire area, and it's great. Regional transportation is a great thing.
I think opening up the transit options so that employees can get to employers to the south, but yet still live in Hernando County is very important.
When there's economic vitality, the quality of life improves for all of us. Envision 2030's goal is a region-wide transit network that efficiently connects people and places, making the Tampa Bay area more competitive with regions across the country. Today's possibilities are great, including rail, bus, rapid transit, and ferry service. And the future is exciting through transit technologies that include Hyperloop, air taxis, and aerial gondolas. Meeting the needs of today, planning for a brighter tomorrow. All of that is possible with Envision 2030.
This is really what we want, and this is how we'd like to see it done.
I think it's important for TBARTA to bring us all together so that we are one voice working for a common goal.
It's really honestly important that we have regional-wide transit from point A to point B without having to drive those distances.
The Tampa Bay area is a collection of great communities, and with our population expected to grow by more than 1 million over the next 25 years, now is the time to act, to speak collectively with one voice to bring world-class transit. That is the key to unlocking the future of our region. The Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority. That is the voice. Envision 2030. That is the plan.
David, any further comments? That was a great.
Thank you, Chris. So we are going to transition. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and transition straight into the presentation now from Bill Ball with Tyndale Alamo.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'll wait for Chris to pull up the presentation.
1 second, Bill, while I get that together. Thank you. I'll be with you in 1 second. I just got to navigate between the presentations here. So bear with me if we could.
Well, I'll just start by saying good morning. And for the record, this is Bill Ball with Tyndall Oliver. We're pleased to be here to present the final version of Envision 2030.
I'm with you in a second here, Bill. Hang on. Very good. Can you see us now?
Yes, just in presentation mode now.
We'll get you there. Sorry there, apologize for that. Let me make sure I get this up here correctly so Bill can do his presentation. Bill, if you can proceed with this, as you can see, that would be helpful to me right now. Do you want to proceed?
I think you advanced a few slides, so you need to go back.
I'll take you back to the beginning, certainly. Sorry about that. There you go.
Sure, this is fine. Yeah, and just as I said before, we're pleased to be here to present the final version of the Regional Transit Development Plan. Next slide, Chris. And this is a summary of what we want to talk about today, mostly what and why, talk about the vision itself, and then how we develop the 10-year plan for that vision. And we're going to spend some time talking about how we address the comments we received since the draft we presented in April. Next slide. Now, besides there being a requirement in the TBARTA legislation to put together this plan, there's some 3 key things that we've talked about in the past with the board. The first is in the middle there. This is a strategic blueprint for the future that we're building consensus on to work toward. Second, in Florida, it's really a requirement to receive state funding for transit in the state of Florida. And third, this is really a strong tool for TBARTA to promote all of the services that it provides. Next slide. What we've talked about over the course of the last year and a half was basically striving toward the benefits and values that we see on this slide and the things that we can do to promote the value of TBARTA's services in the future. So what I want to do is pick a couple of those and talk a little bit more detail about those benefits and the potential that they can provide for the region. Next slide. One of the things that the University of Minnesota, their accessibility observatory did is they looked at accessibility for the Tampa Bay region if in fact Envision 2030 were implemented. And what they've concluded is that it would result in a 58% increase in the number of jobs that the average resident would have access to. I'll mention in particular that about 700,000 workers would have access to more than 10,000 additional jobs. And even more important, over 200,000 low to moderate income workers would have access to more than 50,000 additional jobs if we were able to move to Envision 2030 and the vision that we put together. Next slide. We also talked about the regional competitiveness report that was led by the Tampa Bay Partnership. And we talked about where the Tampa Bay region ranks with other regions around the country. You can see the summary on this slide that looks at where Tampa Bay's ranking is. You see we're at the bottom in both transit supply and transit ridership. We're near the bottom in bicycle and pedestrian safety. We're also near the bottom in affordability in terms of both transportation and housing. Again, another reason that we need to invest in regional transit to help target and improve this ranking in terms of competitiveness throughout the country. Next slide. We've also gone through some significant public and stakeholder engagement over the last 12 to 15 months. You can see that we've reached more than 10,000 people through various techniques that we've used throughout the project, whether it be surveys, social media, direct outreach throughout the last year and a half period. Next slide. As David mentioned, we presented a draft to the board on April 24th. At that point, we started a public comment period where we had a significant distribution of that draft plan throughout the region to business organizations, professional groups, community groups. We had a lot of positive feedback from the general public, but we did hear concerns, and I think most of you are aware of that. We heard concerns from our local partners. So we did spend quite a bit of time, the project team, working together on responding to those concerns, and that was a major focus of how we revised and put together a final Envision 2030 that we have today. Next slide. One of the things we felt it was clear we needed to clarify based on the comments we were hearing is that the top two priorities that TBARTA has as it relates to Envision 2030 is to increase total transit funding that comes to the Tampa Bay area in support of transit, both local and regional transit services. And secondly is to build consensus region-wide as the best way that TBARTA can help move in that direction to support the vision and support the increased total funding that comes to the area. Next slide. And we've emphasized this throughout the project as well, is that we looked at peer regions around the country to see what they've been doing differently and how they've been more successful in the past in securing federal transit funding. So we clearly looked at the focus areas that they've been placing so that we could learn best practices for consideration here in the Tampa Bay area, as you can see on this slide. Next slide. Now, we did spend time talking about the definition of regional transit. If you'll recall, we had a board workshop back in November, and one of the key things we discussed was the definition of regional transit that came from the TBARTA legislation and some additional guidance from the board itself. So the bottom line, the definition is any transit project that crosses county lines or any transit project that will ultimately cross county lines. Additional clarification that we got from the board at that workshop was the importance of coordination with the local governments that are involved in each regional project, and to focus our efforts first on commuters and providing premium transit services to those regional commuters throughout the area. Next slide. So what did we do? How did we put this vision together? Well, there was no reason to reinvent the wheel. We had a lot of work done by the transit operators locally, by the MPOs, previous work done by TBARTA, and we used all that information along with some technical evaluation to pull together that draft regional vision that we then vetted with the public sector, public outreach as well. And that's where we came up with the regional transit vision that we're presenting here today. Next slide. There are two parts to that vision. First is that we propose TBARTA would have responsibility for. You can see the network on this map in this slide, and it ranges from the Regional Rapid Transit Project to the intermodal centers along that project, to rail transit opportunities in the future, to passenger ferry, and the new express bus routes that would connect throughout the 5-county region. That's the first component of the vision. Next slide. The second component is the regionally significant local service that's provided today and in the future. Those are just as important to the overall regional vision network to provide connectivity throughout the 5-county region to the regional routes that we've shown in the previous slide. Next slide. Now, if you put those two together, that is our regional transit vision that combines the services that we indicate as TBARTA's responsibility with the local agency responsibility, working together to perform this regional transit vision. Next slide. So what we did, we have a vision in place now. We wanted to then pull back and say, well, what's reasonable and needed over the next 10 years? So we put together 3 investment scenarios that are indicated on this slide: the status quo, a low impact scenario, and a high impact scenario. We'll talk a little bit about each one of these scenarios and how these were changed based on the comments we received since the draft report was published. First is the status quo scenario. And this basically assumes that TBARTA would continue as they have been more recently. that they would focus on the Commute Tampa Bay program, as well as on regional transit planning and projects that would move forward potentially with the local transit operators. That includes the study that's going on now with Regional Rapid Transit, the Innovative Transit Technology Study, future ferry studies, as well as future updates to the plan that we're talking about today. Now in the status quo, there's no new sources of revenue identified. And in fact, as we look at each of these scenarios, we assumed only existing revenue sources in the final version of the plan. So you could see the revenue we have today versus what these scenarios would cost in the future. Next slide. The low impact scenario, we've made a major change here as well. So if TBARTA were to secure some additional grant funds to support existing regional transit routes, we're showing that in this scenario, those funds would be going to the local transit operators to help make improvements to those existing routes. We also showed an emphasis on further evaluating the needs for regional transportation disadvantaged services for persons with disabilities, and to see if there's a need for services that TBARTA could help fill as well here. And again, no new revenue sources are assumed at this point in the project. Next slide. Finally, the high impact scenario. This is where we build upon the low and where we start really having some major transit capital investment. And that includes 4 new regional express bus routes and the implementation of the first phase of the regional rapid transit, which we're assuming at this point would be from downtown St. Pete to downtown Tampa. Of course, all the capital associated with those operating investments, including new intermodal centers along the regional rapid transit, including at West Shore and Gateway. And then also some planning efforts that would look at future extensions of the regional rapid transit. This was something expressed by District 1 of DOT, an interest in looking at an extension to Manatee and Sarasota counties, as well as an extension to Polk County in the future as well. So those would be studied as part of this scenario. Again, at this point, we assume no new revenue sources, and we'll show how that impacts the costs and revenues here in a moment. Next slide. To give you a sense of what the scenario 3 would look like, here's a map of the high impact scenario. It's basically a subset of the regional transit vision that we showed earlier in the presentation. Again, just recognizing here that it's unfunded at this point in time, but we can get a sense of what it would look like if we decided to find ways to fund that scenario. Next slide. Now let's look at the operating cost of each of the 10-year scenarios. You can see all 3 on the operating side are here today, and this is a cumulative cost of operating over the 10-year period from 2021 to 2030. So you can see with existing revenues that we have currently today assumed to go forward, that's about $42 million in revenue over that 10-year period. And then you can see the cost of each of the scenarios for operating goes from being cost feasible in the status quo to having a deficit of about 16 million in the low impact scenario, and then a deficit of 89 million in the high impact scenario, telling you what additional revenues would need to be generated in order to pursue either of those scenarios from an operating perspective. Next slide. A similar slide for the capital cost. There's very little capital investment in the status quo and low impact. So you can see those are essentially balanced. When we move to the high impact, that's when we have a substantial transit capital investment, especially with regional rapid transit. So you see the significant deficit for the capital budget here in this high impact scenario. Next slide. Again, emphasizing the assumption about existing funding carrying forward through the 10 years. This is what that would accumulate to. Basically that $42 million in operating expense covered, as well as 10 million in capital. And I guess the message here is that we're able to generate $52 million over the 10-year period with a local investment of 5.6 million, which is basically continuing the investment that the counties are currently contributing to TBARTA in the current fiscal year. Next slide. And this is that county contribution to TBARTA in fiscal year 20. And again, this is what we assumed would continue on an annual basis in the next 10 years. And that's about $550,000 in the current year. And this is how it's allocated to the counties based on the percent of population that exists in those communities today. Next slide. So the big question is the future funding for TBARTA that really is needed to pursue the vision that we've identified in Envision 2030. And the bottom line is pursuing dedicated funding from the state as a first priority, both for agency operations and for regional projects. The question is, how do we do that? With recent discussions, we've been talking about facilitating or having the board discuss the best way to facilitate collaborative workshops with local partners to determine what are the best strategies that we can all get on board with to increase the total transit funding to the region and the pros and cons of the different types of concepts that we have identified in the plan for consideration by the region. Next slide. So we put together a call to action with potential recommendations that should be considered in those collaborative workshops. They're organized into 3 areas: policy, funding, and commitment and collaboration. And I'll talk a little bit about each one. Next slide. The first one is policy. First step is to adopt what we have today. And it's clear that the second one is critical step forward, is demonstrating TBARTA's value to the counties today. And then talking about how that value can evolve to much greater value in the future as we make investments in this regional transit vision. Bottom line is securing consensus and support at a policy level so that we can move forward with pursuing funding for the options that we've identified in this plan. Next slide. The funding call to action. Number 1, TBARTA becoming a designated recipient for federal funding. That's in the works, where they can receive funding directly from the Federal Transit Administration. The second one, of course, is pursuing those dedicated funding sources and then leveraging these opportunities with new funding sources that increase the total funding that comes to the region. Bottom line is pursuing those opportunities and then exploring partnerships with the local partners. Next slide. Finally, the commitment and collaboration call to action. Certainly we need to proactive support from the TBARTA board, from the county commissions, from the transit agency boards, and the state legislative delegation for this to go anywhere in the future. And that's where, at this point, based on the discussions we've had in recent weeks, we feel that these collaborative workshops need to be defined by the board in conjunction with the staff and the project team to figure out the best next step to discuss the best ways to move this forward. Next slide. And it really ties back to, again, defining the value that TBARTA can help bring to the region. It's helping support economic development, helping that regional job access that I was showing earlier in the presentation, and making this region more competitive with other regions around the country. The bottom line is providing mobility options and increasing the regional connectivity for all of the residents and visitors to the region. Next slide. At this point, staff is making recommendation of adopting the plan, and what that means is these 3 items. Number 1, asking the board to adopt the unfunded Regional Transit Vision Network to pursue. Number 2 is, at this point, adopt the status quo scenario, as that's the only one that can be funded with existing revenue sources that we have available. And then number 3 is we want the board to support continued evaluation of the concepts that we've identified in the plan based on what we've learned from other regions around the country, and then discuss those in collaboration with local partners, pick the ones that make the most sense to support the region going forward and pursuing Envision 2030 implementation. Next slide. So this is where we are. Back in April, we presented the draft to the board. We facilitated a public comment period through June 1st. In that process, we did make significant changes to the draft to respond to the comments, especially those that we heard from the local transit operators. And at this point, we're asking the board to adopt the plan today. Basically, as I described in the previous slide, we need to submit the plan to the legislative delegation by July 1st. And then our task then is to present to the county commissions and the MPO chairs coordinating committee within 90 days of adoption. and that's also a requirement in the legislation. So at this point, if Chris, you could go back one slide, I would appreciate if you just leave that on the screen. And I think David wanted to say a few words before we turn it over to the board for any comments and questions.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I know we've been talking about this for a long time, but I thought it'd be helpful to kind of review how we got here and the approach that we took while developing the plan. And, it really starts with the statute. You all know that TBARTA became a regional transit authority 3 years ago, and the statute changed accordingly. It specifies 3 powers and duties, one of which is to produce a regional transit development plan. The other 2 are to plan, implement, and operate regional multimodal transit improvements, and then to serve as the recipient of federal funds for regional projects. Regarding the regional TDP, it requires us to identify the costs of proposed projects and the funding sources that could be used to pay for them, which is consistent with TBARTA's 2018 agency action plan that also identified a task of documenting funding structures and innovative funding sources used by other agencies. The statute also identifies several goals and objectives that include public engagement and building partnerships with local governments, transit providers, and other agencies. The plan we developed fits within the framework that it should, and it provides an overview of our public outreach activities, which included presentations and discussions at more than 40 meetings, 2 surveys, and then additional input from the board workshop last November. Looking beyond plan development, the statute also says that we must coordinate planning, development, and implementation of specific projects with the applicable local governments. So it's important to keep in mind what this plan is, and then, as importantly, what it's not. It is not a determination of how things will be, and it doesn't commit anyone at any level of government to funding new service or using any particular source. It is, however, a conversation starter. It identifies gaps in our transit network and outlines regional needs and priorities. It contains ideas for addressing the regional mobility problems that have plagued Tampa Bay for decades and continue today. It recognizes opportunities for us to consider, discuss, and evaluate as we work together in the years ahead, but does not obligate any county or transit agency to any operational or financial change now or in the future. This is a living document that'll be updated annually and hopefully can be the plan that allows us collectively, with continued input and support from our many partners, to bring more regional funding to Tampa Bay and begin implementing some of these improvements that are so desperately needed. Now, I say all this to highlight that we're fulfilling our statutory obligation in the spirit in which it's intended, and will continue to do so to individually benefit each of our 5 counties through regional transit collaboration. I want to thank the project team that worked so hard on this over the last 18 months, specifically Bill Ball and Elizabeth Shook from Tyndale Oliver and TBARTA staff. I want to thank the TBARTA board and its committees for your leadership and guidance in helping shape the plan. And I thank the many people who provided input, especially those who spent time reviewing the plan and provided thoughtful feedback. This is Tampa Bay's first regional transit development plan, and I feel it received the attention that it deserved. So with that, I would again like to offer our recommendations to adopt the unfunded regional transit vision, to adopt the status quo scenario to be funded with existing revenue sources, and then to support continued evaluation of potential actions for the board to consider in collaboration with our local partners. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Before we open this up to comments, I'd like to amplify a couple of your comments there. And this is specifically addressed to concerns that some of the local transit providers and several of the counties had. And I'd like to underscore that it was never our intent to have an operational takeover of any existing services throughout the entire region. And specifically the Sky Connection down in Manatee. I know our former board member, Betsy Benak, had written a letter addressed to me, and I think we addressed many of those issues, and perhaps you can comment on that later in the discussion. And I think also Whit Blanton had made some some comments about impairing the local block grants from DOT. We have no desire to cut into those funds. In fact, in his words, we want to expand the size of the pie for all the counties in the Tampa Bay region. So I want the members to realize going forward, this is not an attempted kind of coup by TBARTA to take over your existing services. We want to build upon them. And every funding mechanism there is subject to approval by the local MPOs and the counties as well. We can't do that on our own. So we are necessary partners going forth in that. And finally, we are under statutory mandate to submit a plan by July 1st. That was in the enacting legislation. So we are rapidly approaching that deadline. And this plan, I think, carefully identifies projects after a long period of public input and thought by our stakeholders. And it does not, again, to your point, it opens a discussion. It does not make any final determinations on funding, on who's going to do what, or operational control, or any of those things. And going forward, we want to work together with all the stakeholders and participating agencies to come to that joint decision. So with that, I'll open it up to specific questions any members might have for you or Bill regarding that. I see Janet, you raised your hand there. You're recognized.
I did, and I even did it electronically too, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I want to commend Bill and David and the entire team for a very well thought through plan. And I think it's important to reflect on how difficult this journey has been in our region, because we've been talking about this kind of thing for over 50 years. So with all of that said, I would like to have a recommendation brought forward about the opportunities or what the plan is to get the additional funding required in order to do it right and do it to the very best of our abilities. I did not see the letter from Commissioner Benak, and I certainly would like to. So Jennifer, you could pass that on. I'd appreciate it very much. But I do think that we have an obligation, as for those of us that are elected officials, to really be wrapping our minds around the best protocols and the best methodologies to use going forward to ensure that we're not chasing a rabbit down the hole. I mean, you know, the fact that we are bringing this forward without those recommendations, frankly, makes me a little uneasy, and especially given that all of us are dealing with budgetary issues because of the COVID virus and the pandemic, not to mention we're staring down hurricane season with a prediction of many storms this season. So I think we have a lot on our plate, and I'd like to hear either from Bill or David what the time frame is for when they might be approaching the county administrators and the other elected officials to talk about how we move forward to secure this additional funding, especially after the economic issues that our citizens are facing. So if there could be some thoughtful discussion about that at some point. I'm not saying that we need to have it today, but I think it should be a major priority for us going forward. And I know I could wax on a lot about this issue, but I won't. I think I've made my point, and I'd like to hear from my colleagues what they think. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. David, or do you or Bill want to respond directly to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I can. So as Bill indicated in his presentation, we will be presenting this final plan to each of the 5 counties within the next 90 days. And I know that we're already on the board agendas in Hillsborough and Pasco, and we're working with the other 3 counties to secure presentation dates for them as well. We'll also be presenting to the CCC. Our I know that all board members have ideas about how we should proceed. And I think each of the board members should have an opportunity, certainly, to provide input into that discussion. So, our thought was to bring this back to the policy committee at the July policy committee meeting to gather more feedback from committee members in order to bring some recommendations to the board. And we'd certainly have some recommendations from staff level to discuss with the policy committee as well.
Thank you, Bill. Any additional comments?
No, I think I would echo what David.
Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Okay, I would add too that again, to reemphasize the point that this is our first step. This plan isn't meant to be a comprehensive final decision now. We're mostly, in terms of what we're actually doing, is identifying the key projects of regional significance here. We're not discussing yet how they're going to be funded or ultimately who precisely is going to run them. But I think this is a necessary first step that we need to, as a board, approve out today and then have those very valuable discussions that Commissioner Long has pointed out as we move forward in this process. To coin David's phrase, it is a living document that will be modified and amplified as we go through the statutory framework here. So I hope we don't get hung up on the fact that this is not ready for complete adoption in its entirety at this juncture, but this is just the necessary first step to move forward. Other comments? Janet, did you have a follow-up comment?
No follow-up. In fact, I would make a motion to pass the recommendations out today.
Mr. Chair.
I'll second that, Commissioner Starkey.
Commissioner Kemp, I have several questions.
You're right.
And I had raised my hand, so I don't know if you saw me in the queue.
I didn't see that. I'm relying on Chris, and Chris, I'll let you, you guide me in that effort.
I will speak up in that regard. I do think there's also some public comment before we move on to any action.
Okay, well, I think we're in the discussion phase first. There was prior to
Chris,
getting.
what's the lineup in the queue, Chris?
Well, I would suggest Commissioner Starkey, and I know Commissioner Kemp is also asking for attention. So I have those two people asking for recognition.
All right, who was first?
Okay, so I just had a quick comment then. I just wanted to say I agree with Commissioner Long and others, and that this, there are some things that are regional and there are some things that are local, and we all have to work together on those things that are regional. And so this is our first step, and I support it. I just want to be brief and say that. Thank you.
Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. I have a couple of process questions. One is, when we receive this, we're understanding that this is 3 different questions. I would like to proceed on each one. 1, adopt the unfunded regional transit vision network as a separate question. 2, adopt the status quo scenario as a separate question. And 3, support the continued evaluation of calls to action. So am I to understand that these have all been collapsed into one motion rather than explicitly dealing with each one?
I don't think the actual motion has been made other than to move forward. And to your point, staff, any recommendations on taking up 3 separate motions?
I believe we had a motion and a second, which suggested moving all 3 forward together.
Right. I think that's inappropriate. With this moving forward, I think we should be voting on each motion. But the other is that I would think that public comment would come before we would vote on this.
Before a vote, yes, that's true.
And I would expect public comment maybe to come after the presentation. That's what I'm used to. So I'm saying before we have this discussion even, that we could have public comment first now.
I think there's been a motion and a second, and I'm perfectly good with going along. Obviously, there needs to be public comment prior, to the vote, and I'm perfectly comfortable doing that now. Are there comments?
Go.
Chair, I do have Rick Homans with Tampa Bay Partnership on the line to make public comment. They had sent in a letter, but Mr. Homans has asked to be recognized to speak live as opposed to having the letter read. Mr. Homans, are you there? Oh, apologies. Go ahead.
Yes, I am.
Rick, you're recognized.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thanks for giving me just a minute here on the Envision 2030 plan. We had sent in a letter about a month ago responding to the draft proposal, and at that time supporting the status quo because we felt like there were so many issues that needed to be resolved with the local transit agency regarding collaboration and funding and competition and such that it needed to have more time. In the time that has passed, we commend Tyndale Oliver and TBARTA staff for really effectively resolving many of those issues and laying some ground rules for collaboration and funding going forward. And so we would at this time, and I think this is very important based on the presentation we've seen, is to support the high impact scenario going forward. We believe that it accommodates many of the concerns that have been raised by the local transit agencies. It doesn't compete for dollars, but it calls for new dollars. And I think we all recognize that for too long, TBARTA has been regarded as an agency that just talks and plans and hasn't done much in its history. And it's important now, I think, to commit to action and results. And the high impact scenario calls for moving forward in the 10-year period with the development of the first phase of the regional rapid transit. And it acknowledges that the funding for that from both a capital and an operational perspective is unfunded at this time. But that's precisely the point of a plan like this, is to set a goal, to set a marker. And the principles of this Envision 2030 is that there would be new funding brought to Tampa Bay to support this. So we don't think it would be appropriate at this point to support what is called the status quo. And we think that it would not send the right message to the legislature and to officials within Tampa Bay at a critical time when we actually need to move this project forward. And it's going to be such a critical component of putting Tampa Bay back to work and connecting people to jobs during this pandemic and economic crisis that we are in. So we encourage you to be bold today and to support the high impact scenario and move off of the status quo into more action and results. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Cindy, other comments?
I have no other public comment on this item at this time.
Okay, thank you.
This is Commissioner Kemp.
Who was up, Chris?
Commissioner Kemp.
Yes. Commissioner.
Thank you. I will, if this motion for one is all put in a single form like this, unable to discuss, I think, what is very important, all these elements of it. I will be voting no. I wanted to speak first to the Regional Transit Vision Network Plan. As I've stated so often, this is not a transit plan. The vast majority of the investment in this plan is in parking garages and highways. Hundreds of millions of dollars are invested in this. They took it from, I don't know, 9,800 parking spaces, garage parking spaces, to 3,400, I think, something like that. But it is the huge part of the plan. These garages are investments of hundreds of millions of dollars of parking spaces for single occupancy vehicles, presumably for a private company's automated vehicle concept, perhaps charging stations. I don't know, but it's not a transit plan. These regional routes are expensive and they don't have high ridership. That's true across the country. It's also been true here in Tampa Bay. We talked this morning, I saw about the 100X and the 300X, of which we've never received an adequate presentation. The 100X for 3 years went from Tampa or St. Petersburg to Tampa along the Courtney Campbell, with one stop in St. Petersburg and one stop at Britton Plaza in Tampa, had 12 buses a day and average passenger ridership in the highest years, and we're talking 2017, 18, and 19, of 9 passengers. The 300X went from the beaches in Pinellas to the airport. It had 10 buses a day of those 3 years, highest ridership year, 7 passengers per bus. We're probably paying about $30 per passenger, I bet, although I've never been able to have those numbers submitted to me, per passenger trip on those bus routes. Meanwhile, our local transit agencies are suffering from a lack of funding, extreme lack of funding. HART is working on a plan now, asking us to cut local services, including our highest ridership routes right now. This raises, and especially in these times, serious equity concerns when we are seeking to use local, state, and federal transit dollars for these parking garages and for expanding the interstate. And for automated vehicle concepts and privatizing operations, of which I've heard many times that there is an intent to privatize, not have these operations done by our union paid bus drivers within our transit agencies. I also hear and heard today we're all about a focus on commuters and premium transit. Well, we don't have decent local transit right now by any means. At HART, we are the most underfunded transit agency in the nation by a long shot, actually worse off than PSTA and 3 times the size, our county. I've heard about choice riders. I think this all talks to the equity, and the equity vision, I think, is wrong. This is not what we need to be doing. This is not what we need to do to provide the most ridership to the people that desperately need it, and to make the best transit system in a local level. This vision is the exact opposite of that. It's taking resources from these. I will also say that as to the status quo scenario, we hear a lot about expanding the size of the pie, but that is not what has happened. Hillsborough County has been asked to pay dollars to pay for a lobbyist that has actually gone to Tallahassee and lobbied, and for 2 years in a row has taken $1 million each from PSTA and HART and put it to support TBARTA. This isn't expanding the pie. This is seriously harming our ability for local transit to do what we should be doing. It raises serious concerns for me. Again, a very serious equity issue when we are so desperately underfunded. So for those reasons, I'll be voting no on moving this forward.
Okay, thank you. There has been a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to call the question. Jennifer, please call the roll.
Jim Holson,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Mayor Jane Castor, Mayor Rick Kreisman,
Yes.
Rich McLean,
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp,
No.
Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitten,
Yes.
and Commissioner Seal.
Yes.
Motion passes 8 to 1.
Thank you very much. And thank you, board, for moving this plan forward. David, do we have any other further logistical comments regarding Envision 2030, or should we move on now?
We can move on to the next presentation.
Okay, and you are recognized for that then.
This next presentation is a follow up to a presentation from last month. WSP reviewed some alignment alternatives related to the Regional Rapid Transit project. And so Scott Pringle is with us again today to review those with you again.
Okay, Scott, you're recognized. Thank you.
Good morning, Scott Pringle with WSP, representing the Regional Rapid Transit team. Chris, if you could advance the slide, please. So just as David mentioned, today is a continuation of basically a 3-month-long conversation with the board as it pertains to the results of Milestone 2. Next slide, please. So as we kind of discussed in May, what the request for the June board meeting is to advance a total of 3 alternatives out of the 5 that we've been reviewing in Milestone 2 into the next phase of the project, which is Milestone 3. In Milestone 3, we begin to look at environmental and community impacts and effects of these 3 alternatives that we advance forward, as well as begin the conversation about sort of station design concepts. Next slide, please. So as we discussed in May, with the first alternative, which is our baseline alternative, which really is more akin to an express bus service along the entire length of the corridor connecting St. Pete to Wesley Chapel. In May, we asked the board to consider advancing Milestone 1 or Alternative 1 to Milestone 3 because it really provides our low-cost alternative, especially when we're looking at very minimal investment in the interstate alignment from a project perspective. And it really does go a long way in providing that point of comparison as we start talking about some of the more capital-intensive alternatives. Next slide, please. So here's a few of the statistics as it relates to Alternative 1 or that baseline alternative. However, I will come back to these items as we go through the following slides because I'm going to always use Alternative 1 in comparison to Alternatives 2 through 5. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, if the board is comfortable with moving forward with Alternative 1, then the decision comes to picking 2 of these 4 alternatives. Just as we discussed in May and April, you can see starting from the left, moving to the right, is the recommendation from the planning phase or the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. Alternative 3 looks at adding freeway BRT lanes up in what I've been kind of affectionately describing as the Pasco Gap, connecting all the way into Pasco County, whereas Alternative 4 looks at dedicated freeway BRT lanes across the Howard Franklin Bridge, and Alternative 5 pulls both of those together. Next slide, please. So one thing I did want to bring to the board today, and it's something that I truly believe it represents an innovation that this project is going to bring forward. We're at the starting point of the development of this concept, and we'll continue to investigate it as we work towards what we call our proof of concept for the operating plan for this project. And what we're looking and what we're seeing from the data is that what makes the most sense for this project is what we call a branch operating system. And now what that means is that we can use that core alignment of the interstate, but have multiple routes that serve a number of different travel markets along this long corridor, this 41-mile corridor. And we call it a branch operating system because in key locations, the idea is that the service actually leaves the interstate and branches out into the neighborhoods to make good connections or that seamless connection to local transit, whether it's in Pasco, Pinellas, or Hillsborough County. So a really good example of that is when we look to the right hand of the screen, you can see the northern portion of the corridor. And a great example is in Pasco County. The idea is that, where we're near State Route 54 at the beginning of the route, we actually make some of those connections to Pasco County Transit, hop on the alignment, and then we get an express service that connects us right to the USF area and right to downtown Tampa. And what we're seeing is that we have opportunities for at least 2 to 3 different routes per primary travel market. And the core travel markets are St. Pete to Tampa, Wesley Chapel to Tampa, and then we have an intermediate corridor or travel market that really connects the Bears USF area through downtown Tampa and into the West Shore area. So with that, next slide, please. So keeping in mind that branch operating system, you can see the travel time shown here, including the first alternative, that baseline alternative. And in the dark blue columns or chart bars is that Tampa to St. Pete travel market. And some of the variations in the travel time is because of that branch operating system, where you have a little bit of extra time when you're offline, making those good connections to local transit. But then once you're on the alignment, you're getting express service to TIA or to downtown Tampa. Now, where we see the greatest deviation in time is the Wesley Chapel to Tampa corridor. Keep in mind, we had two sort of route patterns there, the connecting Wesley Chapel to Tampa and then the university area to West Shore. And when we have opportunity to either connect directly to USF or deviate and connect into some of the neighborhoods in Pasco County, it does create a scenario. We do have additional travel time, but the idea is that you have that connection, get on the corridor and make those express service connections. So the operating system is across all three, is comparable. So when we look at the dark blue columns, working our way from the baseline up to alternative 5, you can see when we add the investment of the freeway BRT lanes in Pinellas County from St. Pete to the Gandy area, Gateway area, we are seeing about a 5 to 6 minute time savings, travel time saving as compared to the baseline. Obviously, this doesn't change when we go to alternative 3, which is filling the Pasco gap because this is focused on Tampa to St. Pete's. But when we do add freeway BRT lanes across the Howard Franklin Bridge, and we discussed those costs at the last meeting, we do see an additional travel time savings of up to 10 to 11 minutes for that additional investment across the bridge. Now looking at the light blue bars, so this is Wesley Chapel to downtown Tampa. Again, working our way across the alternatives. Alternative 2, we do see a benefit, and this includes that gap in Pasco County, where we're seeing the 7 to 12 minute travel time savings as compared to alternative 1. Whereas when we add freeway BRT lanes to sort of fill that gap in Pasco, we are seeing that 12 to 19 minute travel time savings with that investment alternative. And then again, you'll notice that alternatives number 2 and 4 are very similar for this travel market. Keep in mind, this is just Wesley Chapel to Tampa. Whereas when we put all the items together, including the bridge and filling the Pasco gap, again, you can see the travel time saving there of 12 to 19 minutes from Wesley Chapel to downtown Tampa. Next slide, please. Oop. So as a result of that branch operating system, what we're seeing on the ridership side, again, working our way from left to right, alternative 1, we're looking at a total daily ridership of over 4,000 riders just for the express bus service. Really kind of speaks to the importance of this corridor. That daily ridership is actually very similar to what Orlando is seeing on Sunrail today. So great regional project. And then we start adding the investment. Alternative 2, we see that increase up to 5,800 riders for alternative 2. And we do see an increase in what we call those choice riders, which are people who may not have otherwise taken transit, getting up to 2,800 riders per day with that alternative. Alternative 3, 6,700 riders per day, 3,400 choice riders. Alternative 4, about 6,000 riders per day. And then of course, alternative 5, which is our high cost investment, but also represents the greatest ridership benefit at 7,600 riders per day. Next slide, please. So these are the benefits of the project bring, and this is really a derivative of that ridership forecast that I just presented to you. This first slide is the reduction in vehicle miles traveled annually. I'm not going to go and read off each one of the numbers, but you can see the pattern's similar because again, it's following the ridership forecast that we're seeing on these alternatives. Whereas we see a benefit for alternative 2, greater benefit for alternative 3, and then when you combine both the freeway BRT lanes across the bridge and up to Pasco County in alternative 5, that's our highest reduction in vehicle miles traveled. Next slide, please. So this is metric ton equivalents per year in greenhouse gas reductions. Very similar to the conversation about vehicle miles traveled reduction, same patterns here. Alternative 2, 2,300 metric ton equivalents annually as we work our way up to alternative 5 at the highest end at 3,600 metric ton equivalents annually. Next slide, please. So this is, and again, we had a great conversation in May in regards to the alignment costs. What you see here is in the first row from left to right is the alignment cost, station capital cost estimates for each one of these alternatives. So that's the alignment and stations combined. You'll see some minimal investment at stations for alternative 1, the TSM alternative, and then as we discussed in May, escalating as we move through alternatives 2 through 5. The second row, we're actually showing the transit fleet costs and the maintenance facility costs, but it also includes things like professional services, a contingency budget or reserve, which is a percentage of the overall capital cost. So you can see here, so the transit fleet, there are some costs associated with running the express bus service across the corridor and alternative 1, and then escalating as we get to alternatives 4 and 5, where you can see the highest cost. And again, that's both a result of the fleet capital to run that service and that alternative, but also includes those contingencies and those reserve pots. And you can see the combination of the two. In comparison to what we saw in the planning phase during the regional transit feasibility plan, we estimated about $455 million for the project cost, whereas alternatives 1, 2, and 3 are actually below that estimate. And then when we talk about adding going across the bridge, the Howard Franklin Bridge, we do add that additional cost, which is putting us higher than that original planning estimate. So next slide, please. Oops. So what we're showing here is some of the targets that we're going to start working on in developing a financial plan for the project, which includes how much federal investment we could get from the Capital Investment Grant Program that FTA had put out, and the number of phases that we anticipate the project to be built in. So when we look at alternative 1, the baseline scenario, that is not necessarily applicable for the Capital Investment Grant Program for FTA. There are other federal programs out there, but we're just kind of focused on the CIG program. And without that federal share, there is an opportunity for some state funding. By policy, it's capped at 12.5% in the absence of federal funding, leaving the vast majority of the responsibility on the local share at 87.5%. But then as you work our way through alternatives 2 through number 5, we are showing that opportunity for federal funding. You can see some of the percentages here, which is related to how we phase the project. And the idea is to try to maximize our federal contribution as much as possible to sort of leverage and lower the responsibility on especially the local financial requirements. And then of course, looking for that state match to the local dollars. When we talk about the phases, you can see that we're 1 to 2 phases for alternative 1. Alternatives 2 and 3, we're anticipating 2 to 3 phases, which will be tied directly to the TB Next program. And then as we move on to alternatives 4 and 5, which is filling the gap across the Howard Franklin Bridge, we think that would require an additional phase beyond the TB Next program. So next slide, please. So to date, we've had the opportunity to talk to a number of different folks, the business working group, as well as the station working group, our executive team. What we heard back from the business stakeholders was pretty clear consensus from the group that they were very interested in advancing alternatives 3 and 5. The station stakeholder group, also some great conversations there, some interest in alternatives 2, 3, and 5. And the executive team we met with late last week also recommended moving forward with 1, 3, and 5. So at this point, this concludes my presentation. Next slide, please, Chris. And as I mentioned, the recommendation to move into milestone 3 with the following 3 alternatives, which is the baseline alternative 1, the mid-level investment, which is really alternative 3, which fills that Pasco gap with freeway BRT lanes. And then the high-level investment, which does both the Howard Franklin Bridge and Pasco as alternative 5. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll take any questions.
Mr. Chair, you're muted, and I would like to, Commissioner Seal has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, Commissioner Seal is recognized.
Thank you. I believe Secretary Gwynn is on the Zoom as well. And my question is, a lot of alternative 3 and 5 depend on Tampa Bay Next being implemented, and investing in these corridors as well as changes in the Howard Franklin Bridge. So my question for the Tampa Bay Next project is the footprint going to remain in the same concrete footprint for that project? And the reason I'm asking is, of course, there's been discussion over time whether it was going to be enlarged or what. So I just wanted to pose a question. The Tampa Bay Next, does that stay in the same concrete footprint?
Okay, so it really varies by location. Currently, our policy is that if express lanes exist, that the transit would operate in the express lane as opposed to a separate transit lane adjacent to the express lanes. So under the current policy, for instance, in Howard Franklin Bridge, the express bus transit would operate within the express lanes. And then as we build the express lane south to go into downtown St. Pete, which is scheduled to start in 2024, that would also go into the express lanes. Now, once you get across the Howard Franklin Bridge, when we have the West Shore interchange constructed and segment 5, which goes up to the river, you'll actually have a dedicated transit way that will be in there. So you're going to have a separate transit corridor in the median. Once you get north of I-4, the concept would be, because we're not going to have express lanes up there, that the buses could operate on a shoulder that's probably a few feet wider than what the normal highway shoulder would be, but that would be where the buses would operate. And that would take you up to Bears, where the Tampa Bay Next program improvements currently end.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, I have another question for Secretary Gwen regarding the statements he just made.
Pat, you recognized.
Thank you. Secretary Gwen, we've asked this before because it was originally put forth that somehow this plan would take 5 years, whereas the CSX tracks would take 10, which is not at all accurate in terms of transferring or making those tracks if we started with that progress or that idea. Transforming them to commuter rail in 10 years, they said it would take, even though it only took 5 actual years in Orlando. But it was said that this would be available in 5 years. But to be clear, I've asked this question before. You stated first off that these lanes there would not be these express lanes existing for at least till 2030, 2028.
Under current funding, Howard Franklin Bridge should be completed in about 2024 to 2025. The West Shore interchange all the way up to the river would likely be completed in the 2028, 2029 range. And the other segments, the segment going south down to St. Pete, the express lanes would be completed about the same time as the West Shore interchange, maybe a little earlier, 27. And the other segments are not currently funded.
At this time, has there been any approval for a lane, as you say, in the median of I-275 from West Shore to downtown?
Yes, that's part of the segment 4 and segment 5 construction. And in that segment, there's actually a transit way that would connect to the future West Shore Intermodal Center. So it wouldn't operate in express lanes there. It would operate in its own transit way that would be open to this as well as any other local transit that would want to use it.
Right, but you're saying that lane internal is already approved and funded from West Shore to downtown Tampa?
Yes, as part of the West Shore interchange improvements.
Okay. Okay, my other is that you didn't address anything from I-275 north of downtown. You went across I-4 to 75 as I heard it. You didn't address TB Next as it comes from the interchange north of downtown Tampa to out to Bears or Pasco. You didn't address that in your comments. And that will require widening more than, as Commissioner Seal asked, more than the current pavement. What you're talking about there is adding, and what you didn't talk about the funding for that already in place, at least partially, to put add two additional 12-foot lanes, so 24 feet of pavement, besides activating two lanes that are already existing that aren't being used at this time. So we're talking about an additional 24 feet of pavement and activating two more lanes. Is that correct?
No, not exactly. So there is one segment of basically from I-4 north to north of Hillsborough Avenue that is going to be starting construction later this year, or not this calendar year, this fiscal year, so sometime in 2021. And that is to provide one additional general purpose lane in each direction. So you go from 3 to 4. And as part of that, we would widen the shoulders out, I believe, from 12 feet to 15 feet. So in some places, there's already pavement out there that we're going to use, but in other places, we have to widen out. So it's not uniform through that whole corridor. Some places we may not have to widen but a few feet. Other places we may have to widen 15 to 20 feet. But it's all within the existing right-of-way. So it's not going to require additional right-of-way. Now, north of Hillsborough Avenue, there is no current funding program for that. It is obviously in the long-range plan and in the priority list, but it's not funded for construction at this time.
Okay, and the plan that you're putting forward with TB Next is to have an additional 24 feet of pavement north of Hillsborough Avenue, two 12-foot lanes, correct?
Again, it varies. It's not 24 foot everywhere. In some places, you know, out there, we already have some very wide shoulders that haven't been used, and those we would just use those shoulders areas. In some places, it's smaller than that. In other places, especially as you get further north towards Beers, we would need to add more pavement than we do further south. When you get south of Hillsborough, a lot of the pavement is already there. It just needs to be repurposed.
Well, I would like to say that there's significant opposition throughout Tampa to such a plan of widening these roads through the middle of the city and increasing very toxic air pollution that comes with doing that, and comes with the additional traffic that comes with induced demand. As well, the idea to somehow widen Pasco's I-275 when it has been under capacity from Fletcher going north for many years to come, it's projected to be under capacity, would not make any sense, and not as good sense of investment of both of our transportation dollars, and I'm talking about federal, state, and anything else, when our needs are so dire, again, at so many of our arterial roads. And we have such extreme needs in so many ways to even talk about that, having express lanes done in a place that for years and years to come are projected to be under capacity and unnecessary. I'll just say that that doesn't make sense as a scenario for an investment of our precious taxpayer dollars for transportation.
Yeah, I would say you're right. There has been a vocal group that opposes that. When we looked at the larger population that the MPOs For the regional LRTP though, it ranked very high. So it just depends on what area, what population you're choosing from.
And finally, I've said before that what we should do is alternative one, which is express buses. We have them today. They could be deployed without all this. And it doesn't make sense to have a lot of stops on long routes. Those are things that should be served locally and in a local way. And then you make minimal stops along long regional corridors. That's what makes sense in terms of transit ridership, and in terms of our spending our dollars well. So the only alternative that I would support is moving forward on alternative one, which, by the way, we've already been doing and could be done, and is the best way for us to provide the most transit at the lowest cost and to help the most people. Makes the most sense. And those should be done, in my mind, as they are in Miami and Broward and West Palm Beach. They have these express routes. The express routes have minimal stops. They also are done by their local agencies being funded by the state to do these routes. And this is what we should have here. We shouldn't be gunning this up for hundreds of millions of dollars in parking garages and extra lanes, when we can just do what they do express buses, have it state supported. That's what we were supposed to do, bring more money down for HART and for PSTA and for PASCO's service, so that these services could be provided in the best possible way. And I think we should do exactly what they're doing and make sense in Miami-Dade and in Palm Beach and in Broward counties, and not be privatizing these routes, not trying to take dollars that are so desperately needed for our local transit and invest all of our taxpayer dollars well.
Thank you, Pat, for those comments. Members, other questions?
Chair Holton, Commissioner Mitten is first, followed by Commissioner Starkey.
Yes, and as a matter of procedure first, before we take them, and I heard a little discussion of this earlier, I think we should also hear from the Citizens Advisory Committee about their recommendation of this first. And if the Transit Management Committee also was going to include a recommendation in their report about this topic. I noticed from the agenda, we usually have those committees reporting first before agenda items like of this importance. So I'd prefer, after we hear from our board, to hear from those reports too, as well, before we call the question on this matter. Who was up first?
Commissioner Mitten.
Commissioner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the dialogue that's occurred, and I am sensitive to the concerns of my colleague has brought it up on the previous agenda item and also on this one. So I'd like to perhaps hear some narrative from staff or the consultant as to the absolute necessity on the station capital cost, preliminary transit alignment, those numbers there for the different alternatives 2 through 5. It's interesting that they're broken out. You have the maintenance yard, the systems, professional services, and preliminary stuff from the estimates. My question is how, describe for me why we have to have the hundreds of millions of dollars in order to have a regional transit system. And I agree with my colleague in that you want these regional transit lines to go a long distance without having to stop at lots of local different stops. And I'm curious as to the desire to have the large stations and what makes up those costs and why it's so necessary, and why we would feel very responsible in voting for these hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, whether they're federal, state, and then of course that local match. Why would we feel responsible in doing that to make sure we have a regional transit system?
So, Mr. Chair, I could start off by addressing
I
that.
recognize.
Thank you. So when it comes in terms of the station costs, we did go through a technical effort, and during the planning phase, we had 21 stations. And an evaluation of the data, as well as working with stakeholders and the public, we did advance 13 of those 21. So we've already taken that step in sort of prioritizing what we think are the key regional stops along the corridor. Now, in a relationship to station costs, everything that we've got right now is a placeholder. We still haven't, our next step, and as we move into milestone 3, is we're going to start the conversations going to begin to move away from the alignment now that we've got some of the details in place, and the focus will be on those stations. And we have the opportunity to evaluate how much traffic is needed at each station, or parking, excuse me, at each station, and the scale of each station. And that will dramatically impact our costs. And the goal is that what we have in place now is a conservative placeholder, so that as we get into that level of analysis, we could revisit that, refine that, and hopefully, ideally, those prices will continue to come down once we have greater detail. Now, in terms of the performance of each one of these alternatives, we balance everything against the federal criteria for cost effectiveness, which gives you sort of a benchmark for how well that service is performing in terms of the number of people it's able to attract and serve on an annual basis. And what we're seeing is that from a cost benefit scenario, when we look at alternative 3, even though it includes the additional cost of freeway BRT lanes up into Pasco County, the additional ridership and time savings that's gained because of that does get us within striking range of that FTA benchmark. And again, we still have a lot of work to do. These 3 alternatives are the recommendation is just to move them into the next step so that we can continue the evaluation and to get into greater detail as we work our way towards essentially what will be the locally preferred alternative as a result of this project.
So I thank you for that explanation. And I guess I would just for the record state that I want to make sure we move this forward, and we have our plan approved. We just did that. We'll be able to get that to the state. And I'd love to move this forward and make sure that we have the plans and the discussion around the different types of parking and how many and all the station costs, et cetera. I just wanted to make sure that people understand that moving this forward, it's very, very easy for one to take a look at the board's actions and have an overt approval of these costs. And I would say that this is not the case, at least in this commissioner's opinion. We need to move this forward and have these conversations and get the details, but under protest with the cost involved and the taxpayer dollars that we are seemingly approving as we go forward. The details hopefully will be able to change some of these costs, but these are burdensome, and as has been mentioned, perhaps could be used in significantly more effective fashions in our region. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Chris?
Starkey.
Commissioner, you're recognized.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Commissioner Mitten, for those very thoughtful comments. But I do want to remind my commissioner from Hillsborough County that, we in Pasco County signed on to support the project at the airport in the West Shore interchange. And that took many counties coming together to support that as a very important project for the region. And is that how that, am I correct, Mr. Secretary Gwynn?
Yes, I believe the widespread support in the region led to us obtaining those funds, as well as the funds for the PSTA BRT route that was recently received federal funding.
So I think when we act as a regional body, all of us benefit. And I find it a little disingenuous that you're always talking about local issues, which I understand are important. We have the local issues of importance in our county, but seem to always want to block the regional effort. And I see your economic development corporation that just took the regional name for itself out there trying to get lots of new businesses to move to Hillsborough County, but you want to shut your borders to regional transportation efforts. So it's a really mixed message. You want to be the big dog, but you don't want to play with the communities around you. And I find it an interesting position that you are putting yourself in. And I wholly support working on local transportation issues within your community. I think it's very important, but we also have a responsibility to the region. And like it or not, you have the port. Like it or not, you have the airport. And so we all need to be driving through your county. And I just wish that you would want to work with the other counties around you. I'm frustrated, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Other members, any comments?
I would just like to respond for a minute.
Yeah, you're recognized.
Yes, I just want sensible regional plans that aren't boondoggles and will actually work. And this is what they have in Miami-Dade and Broward and Palm Beach, and they've worked out something that makes sense and is the most effective and low-cost way to move people between those three counties. And why we can't model that and do it right away, tomorrow, I don't know. And as far as West Shore, it makes sense that Pasco County would support that. And it's as much a benefit to Pasco and Pinellas, as you said, as anyone else. So I am very much about, I would like each of the areas. I'm not about competing for the economic development of Pasco County, for instance. I think it'd be great for Pasco County to have businesses that are walkable and that people go and work close to home. And that's what I think we need to build. We need to support the local, and that supports the region. I was very much a supporter, for instance, of the local BRT in St. Petersburg, which no matter what anybody says, it's a local BRT. And that's what the kinds of things we need to do to strengthen the economic development of the region and to do the best we can and use our dollars most efficiently to move people. So I've said we should do exactly what they're doing in Miami-Dade and Broward and West Palm Beach to move people and get state investment to do that. And I think it just makes the most sense. I'm not about approving what I feel like is a boondoggle and a bad investment of transit dollars.
Thank you. Let's now hear from Bill Johnson. Again, I'm wanting to hear from those guys first before we take public comment on this.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Kreisman had raised his hand. And then
oh, okay. I was unaware. Mayor, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if you want us to weigh in at this point in time as far as which alternatives we feel are the best, but I do think, and I understand my colleagues' comments, especially as it relates to the BRT on the First Avenues. I'm going to say First Avenues, even though we call it the Central BRT. It's not running on Central. But it may maybe feel local, but quite frankly, I think its importance was significant because it can help demonstrate that people are willing to use alternative means of transit and mass transit and BRT to get around. And for us to move forward with this regional system, I think it's a great first step. I've been in South Florida and I've seen the express routes and people using the express lanes, and quite frankly, it isn't a whole lot better than the main lanes. And so I've got some serious concerns about simply relying on express routes as a way of getting back. People are looking for frequency, they're looking for reliability, they're looking for timeliness. When I look at these alternatives, alternatives 3 and 5 to me really stand out. They reduce the most CO2 tonnage. They have the greatest percentage of freeway BRT use, the most impact on time saving, the most daily riders, and the most reduction on vehicle miles traveled. Those are the things we ought to be seeking as a region. And I thank Commissioner Starkey for her comments. I think it's critical. I want my folks to be able to get up to Wesley Chapel as much as I want those folks to get down to St. Petersburg. And so we've got to look regionally while all of us on our own look at our own services with PSTA, for example, here in Pinellas. And I'd love to see them be able to increase their ridership and their funding. We still have to look regionally. If we're going to compete as a region, we've got to have better regional transit, and we've got to have greater access available. So I'm fully supportive of this moving forward, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and again, congratulations on the Central Avenue, really First Avenue BRT. It's a great success for Tampa Bay and for the region. Due to your efforts, Commissioner Long's tireless efforts in this matter, and all the other folks that made that happen. And it's a great first start in terms of a federal grant for the entire Tampa Bay region, and serves as a model to us all for good hard work and perseverance and hanging in there. So good work on that, and thanks for those comments. Members, any other questions before we let Bill weigh in on this from the CAC?
Commissioner Starkey asked for recognition.
She's recognized.
It's okay. I will not make any more comments, but I do want to say we all think rail is good, but I think we all saw those numbers that it was unattainable at this time. And so as a first step, we're putting in this BRT spine as a first step. Lots of work to do. I don't know where all these numbers of parking lots come from, because we don't even know what those are going to look like. So let's just remember, it's a first step in a regional system, and there is federal money for regional systems that we are leaving on the table for other communities to use, because we can't get our act together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let's call on Bill now, Johnson, to give the, Bill, would you prefer to just address this issue at hand now, or give your entire report while you have the floor?
I think it makes more sense just to address this issue and come back to it, if I may, at the end of the meeting as scheduled.
Perfectly well. I was giving you the option of doing that. And again, I'd like to be with you on that beautiful beach in your
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes,
added some new islands.
Well, it's indicative or characteristic of Clearwater Beach. The TBARTA Citizens Advisory Committee did meet on June 17th via Zoom, and we had a quorum addressing this particular subject. We did review the regional rapid transit update, and by committee vote unanimously endorsed the recommendation of staff to proceed with options 1, 3, and 5. And I'll reserve my other comments until later. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bill. And Kurt, did the Transit Management Committee have any recommendations to this issue?
No, sir. There was the Transit Committee did not have any recommendations, but there was a general consensus based on the recommendations from the staff on 1, 3, and 5. A couple of the comments were along the lines of what made previously by the mayor, was that the reliability is an important part of BRT, and making sure that we set it up so it is reliable, because people will ride it then. Kind of dictates that we have the Pasco County expansions in there, because if you ever driven up on Pasco County, sometimes that traffic can get backed up pretty big, especially getting off at 56. Having a specific lane to be able to queue jump, so to speak, that area is important. And also the cutting down the drive time was the other points brought forward during the meeting because of those areas and all the way through the route. And they liked number 3 because of the cost, as opposed to, again, how we're going to pay for the level 5. But that's the only comments that came out of the meeting.
Okay, thank you for those comments. That being said, I will accept a motion to advance this milestone forward. Is there a motion?
I make a motion to advance the project forward, and thank you very much for all the hard work.
And that's, and Jana, just to clarify, that's to move staff's recommendations of 135 to move forward.
Mr. Chairman, just sorry to interrupt. I think Cindy Raskin has her hand raised. There may be public comment.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, let's just take public comment now prior to the vote. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, we do have one letter that's been submitted by the Tampa Bay Partnership. They've asked that it be read into the record.
Please do.
Thank you. Dear Chair Holton and Board, on behalf of the leaders of the Tampa Bay Partnership, we want to thank the Board and staff of TBARTA for your work advancing the Regional Rapid Transit Project. We are heartened by the project and moving the RRT from a high-level concept 18 months ago to what will soon be a viable project. We commend WSP and its project team for the professional work they have done to date. At your meeting on June 22nd, you will be asked to advance to the next phase of project development, the baseline project, along with 2 of the 4 alternatives presented. We encourage you to advance the baseline project along with alternatives 3 and 5. From the moment this bus rapid transit concept emerged from the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan, the partnership has advocated that it be designed, built, and operated according to the gold standard as outlined by the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. The gold standard requires that quantifiable and measurable attention be paid to dedicated transit lanes, integration of stations into the communities they serve to promote maximum transit-oriented development, and other features including level boarding, off-board ticketing, and frequency of operations. To be absolutely clear, the Tampa Bay Partnership supports alternative 5 over all others. This alternative incorporates a hybrid shoulder/transit lane and/or dedicated transit lane for most segments of I-275, giving the RRT the speed and certainty of schedule it needs to attract maximum ridership. However, we understand that proceeding with a hybrid shoulder/transit lane across the Howard Franklin Bridge would add additional costs to the project, given internal policies that are currently in place at FDOT. FDOT has shared with us that the extra cost of the hybrid shoulder/transit lane on the bridge, $180 to $200 million, is a direct result of an internal policy that prohibits placing a transit lane immediately adjacent to an express lane. If it were not for this internal policy, FDOT has assured us that the new bridge could easily accommodate, at no additional cost, the expanded shoulder footprint that would create a hybrid shoulder/transit lane across the entire bridge. Instead, because of this policy, FDOT requires that alternative number 5, as it currently stands, include the expansion of the bridge width to include a fully dedicated transit lane. Therefore, we believe the most prudent action to take at this point is to advance alternative number 3 in addition to alternative number 5, where alternative number 5 presents dedicated transit lanes for virtually the entire project, including the Howard Franklin Bridge. Alternative 3 presents dedicated lanes for virtually the entire project with the exception of Howard Franklin Bridge. It is our hope that FDOT will make an exception to its express lanes policy and permit the hybrid shoulder/transit lane on the bridge. This will provide TBARTA the ability to adopt alternative number 5 when it is time to make a decision regarding the preferred option. More importantly, this policy change would give Tampa Bay a truly regional premium transit project, connecting 3 counties with dedicated transit lane for nearly all of its 41 miles. As we move forward this significant transit project, we should continue to aspire towards giving our residents the most connected community possible and push for the alternative that best meets the unique needs of our region. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely yours, Chad Moore and TJ Listowski. Apologize, I've killed that. Co-chairs of the Transportation Working Group. We also had previously had Rick Homans on the line from Tampa Bay Partnership, who was going to add additional comment. But he has left the call. He said that the contents of this letter cover the comments of the Tampa Bay Partnership.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Mr. Chair, if you would allow me, I have to get off this call because I have another meeting to attend, which is critical. So if we could take the vote now, I'd be really grateful.
Yeah, I am going to call, since there's no other public comment, there's been a motion, a second. Any further discussion? Cindy, please call the roll.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure we got a second on the motion.
We did not.
Oh, I thought we had a
second it.
Sorry, is there a second on the motion?
Who seconds?
Second it.
Cliff Manuel's
Cliff
second.
Manuel.
Motion is second. Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Jim Holton,
Yes.
Cliff Manuel,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Mayor Kreisman,
Yes.
Rich McLean, Commissioner Kemp,
No.
Commissioner Starkey,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitten,
Yes.
Commissioner Seal,
Yes.
so the motion does pass 7-1.
Okay, thank you. Moving forward. And Janet, if you have to leave, we certainly understand. Next up is the committee reports. Cliff, you're recognized for the legislative subcommittee.
So we had a legislative subcommittee report today. We had 2 agenda items, state and federal legislative updates. I would like to recognize the state legislative update first in the report that we received from Ron Pierce. If you could recognize him, Mr. Chairman, that would be appreciated.
Ron, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. I'll be quick. I know time is of the essence here. Just a quick update. The governor received the budget last week. So at this point in time, we expect the governor to take action on the budget probably sometime early this week. At this point in time, we've had numerous conversations with some of our friends in Tallahassee. And the good news is right now, everybody's saying all the right things with regards to our line item being safe. I think there's a couple things going in our favor. Number one, it's transportation trust fund dollars and not any type of recurring or non-recurring general revenue, number one. And number two is we do have a track record. We have been approved by this governor in the past. And so, he and his team are very familiar with TBARTA and do like the direction that we're going as an organization. Again, we would anticipate action by the governor probably sometime early this week. And the moment that happens, we'll obviously make sure that you as board members know. That's all. That's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. We also had a federal legislative update. I see Steve Palmer still on the line. I'm not sure if Harry Glenn is, but would like to also include and recognize them, Mr. Chairman.
Please do. Proceed.
Harry, are you still online, or it's all Steve?
Steve, are you online?
I see Steve. Let me unmute his mic very quickly. I'm not able to do that, so.
Sorry, I was online, but I just didn't get to it in time. I'm sorry, I missed the question though.
We're just getting a similar update to what we gave earlier.
So, okay, real quick, and I apologize, Mr. Chair. There are 2 things just to highlight real quick. One is the Surface Transportation Bill, which was approved by the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee last week, is a $500 billion highway transit and passenger rail bill. It was approved basically on a party line vote, 35-25, because the bill was written by the Democrats. And as we found out on Thursday, the reason it was written without any Republican input was this is a part of the Democratic leadership infrastructure bill, which is going to be a $1.5 trillion bill that includes not just highway transit and rail, but also a number of other different things that will be on the House floor later this month on June 30th. There are a number of provisions that are very, very favorable to buses. They try to streamline bus procurement. incentivize bus frequency, and on the transit side, in addition to about a 40% funding increase, the majority of the bill is aimed at trying to improve bus transit operations and make them more efficient. In addition to the reauthorization bill, that's a 5-year bill, and every year you have to have appropriations to pay the bills. There's a way I describe it. You've got a 5-year policy bill and then a 1-year funding bill. The appropriations bills are starting to move in the House and the Senate. After the July 4th recess, the House will start to take votes in committees on the transportation housing bill. It will be approximately the same as this year because the 2-year budget deal really set the cap about at the same level, so we don't expect any big changes. But we do anticipate that they won't finish that bill or an infrastructure bill before the election, so there will be extensions or continuing resolutions on both. Lastly, I'll just say real quickly, the House passed the HEROES Act, which had a lot of funding for state and local governments. It was a very large bill, nearly $3 trillion. The Senate has not yet taken that bill up, and they're expected to start working on that in mid-July when they return from their July 4th recess. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for my delay, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Steve? Thanks so much for that report. Clerk, anything further?
We have no action items today, Mr. Chair, so that concludes the legislative committee report.
Okay, thank you for that report. Finance Committee is next, and in Commissioner Long's absence, I chaired that this morning. And basically, we went over the financials and the audit results. And I'll recognize Melanie Williams to give us the brief update on the current financials.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon. So the year-to-date through the month of May, the net surplus was $135,000, and this $135,000 was $166,000 under the budget amount of $301,000. Moving over to the revenues, our revenues were under budget by $2.6 million, and this is primarily due to the timing due to the PD&E and technology study. The expenses for the month of May was $2.4 million under budget, and this is also primarily due to the professional services dealing with the consulting for the PD&E and technology study. Moving on to the balance sheet, our accounts receivables were approximately $577,000, along with our accounts payable was $303,000. At the end of May, our cash balance was $182,000. And that pretty much wraps up the summary for May 2020.
Thank you, Melanie. Members, questions for Melanie? Okay, none being heard. Lance, are you still on the line?
Actually, this is Danny. I'm speaking for Lance.
Yes, you're recognized.
So,
you're recognized.
Thank you. Hello, board. Lance gave the
I'm losing you here. Can the rest of the
committee a more detailed version? Darn. Are other people having a hard time hearing me?
I'm having a difficult time hearing you, yes.
Danny, we're having a little hard time hearing you. Do you have an alternate microphone? Or I don't know if you're on headsets or if you just want to take a minute to see.
I am not on headset.
Try this. Try now. You sounded better right there.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go quickly while I have good sound. If you want to go to the next slide. So the board would have received our audit report. It's over 50 pages. So I wanted to disclose that you should take everything I say in context of the audited financial statements. So do take the time to read those as they have all the detailed information of what we'll go over. If you want to go to the next slide. So what exactly TBARTA hired us to do? We did an audit of your financial statements. So not only the numbers, but the actual footnotes in those statements. We did the state single audit. There are two types of audits. There's federal audits and state audits. TBARTA did not have enough money for federal expenditures to require a single audit on federal monies this year. So we The only program we needed to test was the commuter assistance program. So that's what we did for the state single audit. And then we also did agreed upon procedures related to your national transit database. And that's largely performance report related. If you want to go to the next slide. So the actual results within the packets that you'll see, your audit report over the financials is unmodified. So that's actually a clean audit. So congratulations to that. We also are required to look at your internal controls and report on those. And there were no findings on internal controls. And then lastly, on your single audit, there were also, we gave an unmodified opinion, just like your financial statements, that is clean. But the financial statement audit and the compliance audit, there are no material or significant deficiencies. So that's excellent. Huge improvement from last year. And then we did have a few management comments. There were 4 of them, and these are reported in a management letter, just so management can take those, make improvements in the next year. They're certainly not as serious. So those included proper recording of capital assets, the preparation and adequate approval of journal entries, timely preparation of bank reconciliations, and I'll caveat that with there was transition in this year, so a lot of these just had to do with the transition of personnel. And then lastly, budgetary control. There was expenditures over the budget. So if you can go to the next slide, Chris. And so I just want to thank you and the staff for the help this year. It was a little more complicated because of COVID-19, but everyone did really well and we're still able to issue on time. So that speaks well to Melanie especially. So thank you for that. And I'm happy to take any questions, although I know most of you have already heard this.
Members, questions for Danny? Okay, thanks for that report then, and thanks for the great work and the timeliness in getting this out during these hard times.
Definitely.
Thanks for all your help on that. Moving on to the policy committee. Yes, sorry.
I'm sorry. I think the staff recommends the board approving the FY 2019 audit report.
Oh, did we need
I think, is that norm? Yes.
Yes.
Council?
There's an action for you to approve it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you need to approve the audit report and you'll need to take public comment, Jim.
Okay, yes, let's do public comments prior to calling for this. Any public comment? Cindy?
I do not have any public comment for this item.
Okay, none being heard, I will accept a motion to approve the audit report.
I move to approve.
Is there a second? A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Jennifer, please call the roll.
Sorry, who's second?
Mr. Mitten.
Jim Holton?
Yes.
Cliff Manuel?
Yes.
Commissioner Long left. Mayor Priceman?
Yes.
Rich McLean?
Don't believe he's present.
Commissioner Kemp? Commissioner Starkey?
Yes.
Commissioner Mitten?
Yes.
Commissioner Seal?
Yes.
At this time, we only have 6 people that did vote, so we are not able to pass this unless we have one more person that will show up.
Yeah, I believe Rich McLean had to leave. He had notified us earlier. Council, we would need to defer this to the next meeting?
Yeah, you'll need to defer till the next meeting.
Okay. All right, well, no action taken on that then. So we'll move on then to the policy committee report, and Rich had to leave. There was basically reporting out of that, nothing of significance there that had to be advanced along. David, is that basically correct from the policy committee? David, are you on?
Yeah, sorry, was getting unmuted. Yeah, that's correct. We presented the draft PTAS, the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, to the policy committee. We're giving them a month to review that. We will come back next month and ask for a recommendation from the policy committee to move that to the full board for approval.
Okay, yeah, and that was the basic sum and substance, I believe, of the policy committee. Okay, that concludes the internal committee reports. Next, we'll move on to the CAC, and Bill, you're recognized again.
Bill's muted. Let me see if he's there. Still appears to be muted.
There, how's this?
Now I can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you. As I said, the Citizens Advisory Committee of TBARTA met on June 17th via Zoom. We did have a quorum. We received an advance report on the Innovative Transit Technologies report that you will be receiving next month. We also received a report on the potential allocation of the CARES Fund that came to TBARTA. It was reported to us that this funding might be used for regional transit disadvantage program. By vote, we support this needed service, but we would caution that such a service should be initiated in a way that can be sustainable. The transit disadvantaged are more likely to be stressed if this expanded service is only temporarily in place. In closing, we reviewed the state of regional transit in the line of coronavirus. We passed a motion recommending that you, the TBARTA board, recognize the outstanding heroic work of our region's transit agency staff members. And finally, consistent with our bylaws, our committee officers this month have completed their 2-year term limit. So the CAC elected Mr. Bill Roberts as our incoming CAC chair and Mr. Bob Woodmar as the CAC vice chair. At this time, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to introduce Mr. Roberts and Mr. Woodmar to the TBARTA board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and please do.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. Bill Roberts here. I'm a resident of Hillsborough County. I'm looking forward to leading the CAC this year with support of my colleague, Mr. Whitmar. We have a lot of work to do, and we look forward to bringing recommendations to the board that you will be able to act favorably upon. Thank you for your service to our region, and we look forward to working with you soon.
Thank you, and thank you very much likewise for your service, and we look forward to the coming months to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Bob Widmar, I've been elected the vice chairman, and I look forward to another profitable year. We have a great group. We've lived in Fernando County since 2000, got appointed by Cliff Manuel, thank you. And look forward to eventually seeing light rail somewhere. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, for you and the board's efforts.
Thank you for your service and continued efforts there. And again, look forward to working with you in the coming months. Thank you. Bill, are you back?
I am back, but I have no further report.
Well, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you for your tenure as chair there and all the good work you've done, and enjoy the rest of the day on the beach there. So
okay, thank you.
Thanks for the great work you guys have done. Next up is the Transit Management Committee report, and Kurt, you're recognized.
Thank you, sir. We met, the TMC and TAC met on June 9th. Had some good presentations given to us. Brian gave us a very good presentation on some trips that Transit's going forward. And then, of course, we had the brief on the RRT, as you guys, the committee's already seen. One of the things that was brought about was the CARES Act funding that TBARTA has received and how they might be able to use that to enhance regional transportation. We had a good discussion on that and talking about how we might be able to leverage that money to help provide transportation trips from other counties down to Tampa Bay, as evidenced by the Envision showing all the trips moving back and forth. Beyond that, there was not many recommendations that I have not already given. And barring any questions, that's my brief for today.
Thank you so much. Members, questions for Kurt? None being heard. Thank you for that report. The next is the chairman's report, and I'll be brief. Basically, I'd like to thank the board, staff, and our consultants and stakeholders for doing an excellent job with advancing 2030 forward and the milestones. This was no small undertaking, especially during difficult times with COVID. And they've done a great job in doing that. Secondarily to that, they've also done a fantastic job in being responsive to questions and concerns from stakeholders, especially the local transit providers and the various counties. And I think we have resolved all differences today based on the vote. And I hope that moving forward, we can have the same spirit of regionalism and dedication to this entire area for the benefit of all, and really enhance that pie for the Tampa Bay region. So heartfelt thanks to everyone that participated in these vital projects, and look forward to continuing with our efforts. I'll now recognize David for his executive director's report. And David, just mention as you conclude with that some of the future meeting subjects here, so we can let folks get on with their day.
Will do. Thank you. Just wanted to remind everybody that we now have a new home. Our things were moved to the new office on Saturday, and we will spend the next few days unpacking and getting settled. It's not quite ready to show off yet, but we are in, and our network and internet are in place, and we provided all the proper notices to everyone that we need to notify. I want to thank Jennifer for coordinating everything related to the move and for having it go as smoothly as it possibly could. There were a lot of details to keep up with throughout the process. You would think that a move for an agency as small as us would be simple, but it definitely was not. So, somehow Jennifer made it look easy, and just wanted to give her a big thank you for all of her efforts. Next is our new grantee status. You may recall that we submitted a packet back in December to become an FTA grantee, and we updated our procurement policies last month related to that process. We sent FTA the updated manual after the board meeting, and I'm happy to announce that we received a letter on June 4th congratulating us on being approved as a new FTA recipient. As exciting as that is, FTA did take the opportunity to also remind us of the other side of the coin, which is the compliance requirements that come along with this new status. We are certainly up for the challenge though, and we are prepared to move into this next very significant phase of TBARTA's evolution. Next is the agenda management system, which I haven't updated you on lately because everything else happening in the world, but we have been working on that. The system is called Unicode, and we are in the process of going live with it. You should have all received an email about a July 8th training webinar at 4 p.m., but we can certainly schedule separate individual training sessions for those who are unable to attend that one. Our plan is to do a soft launch for our July meetings on the 17th, and then fully implement it for the August 21st committee and board meetings. And then speaking of future meetings, you're probably aware that Governor DeSantis issued Executive Order 20-139 on June 3rd, which brings an end to previous Executive Order 2069 on June 30th. 20-69 was the executive order that allowed us to conduct meetings electronically, meaning that this sadly will be our last Zoom board meeting. Our original schedule calls for us to be at PSTA in July and at HART in August. We don't know yet what measures they'll have in place for distancing board members and accommodating the public, but we will coordinate with both agencies and will provide more information as we have it. And finally, I do want to give birthday wishes this month to Chair Holton. Hope you have a happy and a safe birthday. And as you mentioned, related to future meeting topics, we have several presentations scheduled for next month. One will be a final report on our innovative transit technologies study, and that'll be followed by a presentation from Lilium, who is an air taxi manufacturer and one of those that we interviewed during the ITT study. We'll have them on the line and they'll give an update on where they are with their technology development. We're also scheduling a presentation from Port Manatee and also a presentation from a TNC called USERV, which is, they are implementing a program called Advantage Ride for the Commission for Transportation Disadvantaged. They began with a pilot program providing trips for residents in Manatee, Hillsborough, and Pinellas counties. So we're going to have them on the line and provide a presentation related to that program. Unless there are any questions, that concludes my report.
Thank you, David. Members for questions for David? Okay, none being heard. David, do we have presentations today?
We have no more presentations. Those other,
there was a line in there, so that's, I assume there were not, so.
Yeah.
Okay, any old or new business to come before the board? None being heard, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.